Streaming. All right, so this is not going to be a typical episode of Liberal Dan Radio Talk from the Left. That's right. I'm not live on Blog Talk Radio right now. I am only going live on YouTube, and we are going to be discussing the ruling or the draft ruling that has been released by Politico. This ruling is one that, if it is the official, it's not the official version yet, but if this wording is not drastically changed from the current draft that it is now, we are going to see an end of federal protections to reproductive rights in this country. That could be coming as late as June of this year. So I had an initial reaction to some of the words in the draft, and I posted that on TikTok and on YouTube, so you can watch that if you want after this live stream. But I am going to be talking about this more on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, here on YouTube or on blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan. I couldn't just sit by and not just comb over what's in this draft. So I might wait a few seconds to start going over the text of the draft, but we're going to see what it says. I've already criticized some of it. Alito is a hypocrite to the nth degree. I'm sure he addresses it, but he's still a hypocrite to the degree. We'll go over that a little bit more. We'll go more into that, because basically there's this thing called stare decisis, and stare decisis is the idea that once a rule is ruled upon, it's settled law to the law of the land, and of course it's not without exceptions. If you couldn't overturn a previous Supreme Court ruling, we'd be stuck with Plessy versus Ferguson. Instead, we got Brown versus Board of Education. If you couldn't, so there's that. There's been other rulings in the past that have been overturned as well. I'm not going to go over all of them, but here we are. Handmaid's Tale country, under his eye, all that bad crap, I should say. We're going to be talking about this, and I welcome you to join us in the chat as well. Say hello, say what you have thought, or what you're seeing from people. We got a couple people watching. Hopefully it'll be more. If you remember, please remember to like. If you're watching, please remember to like and subscribe. Not necessarily that you should like this ruling or this draft of the ruling, because honestly it sucks. It sucks. Reproductive rights, as I said in my TikTok video that I also uploaded to YouTube, the attack on reproductive rights is basically a national pastime in this country. We treat people who can bear children as if they are second-class citizens, and even worse if intersectionality puts even less privilege on them, minorities and the such. So we're going to go over as much of this as possible. Written by Justice Alito, of course, because Alito is one of the biggest hypocrites, I guess, of them all. Let's see, first draft. This is the first draft. Notice this opinion is subject to formal revision before publication in the preliminary print of the United States reports. Readers are requested to notify the reporter of decisions, Supreme Court of the United States, watching to see if any typographical or other formal errors, in order that corrections can be made before the preliminary print goes to press. Now, this is what this says to me, is that there's probably not going to be much in the way of changes, contextually. So there might be some contextual, I think contextually it's probably going to remain the same. That says to me that this draft is out there so that they can look through if they misspelled a word, or if they didn't get a particular ruling right or not. That's what to me, that's what this is saying. That the 5 justices, whoever these 5 justices are, I mean, I haven't gotten to that point yet. Whoever these 5 justices are who have reached this decision, their minds are likely set. And I think we probably all know who they are. If it's 5, I think if I had to guess, Roberts would likely be in the minority. Again, because this is such an overreaching and just not the we're going to allow you to tick it down type of ruling where they chip away at it. This is just squash. And Roberts has shown in and of itself that what's up, Captain Hotlicks? What are you looking at? We are talking about the draft that has been leaked by Politico of the ruling that should be overturning Roe v. Wade when it comes out, and my problems with it as we go forward through it. But as I said, Chief Justice Roberts has proven himself before to support the idea of stare decisis. Why? How did he do that? When the initial Texas law that would have required providers and abortion clinics to give, in order for them to be able to perform abortions, the abortion doctors would have to have admitting privileges at a hospital. I don't know why. That's ridiculous. If there's an emergency, you could just send them to the emergency room. But according to that there had been no ruling on such things before, and Chief Justice Roberts voted in support of the law, even though at the time it was a 5-4 split, and he was in the minority. Come around to the Louisiana law. The Louisiana law was basically the exact same law as the Texas law. But this is maybe about a year later, and when it came around again, Chief Justice Roberts said, well, the precedent is that this type of law is unconstitutional, so I'm going to now rule with the existing Supreme Court precedent, and I'm not going to overturn what we passed last year. So there's that. So that's why if I had to bet, it probably would. I haven't gotten down to any 5-4 or whatever at this point. However, I do believe that if the ruling is 5-4, it's probably going to be Roberts with the minority. I think he might have ruled with a majority if it would have just been a chipping away of the rights, but an overall squashing of both Roe v. Wade and KCV Planned Parenthood. I can't imagine that he's going to join in that again, because he, unlike Alito, kept to his word during his confirmation hearings. Because again, Alito during his confirmation hearings stated that he supports the idea of stare decisis, but Alito has proven himself to be a liar on that point. Roberts has supported stare decisis, and that one case, and there has been several cases where that's been the case, where he has ruled in such a way. So, Supreme Court of the United States, Thomas Dobbs, State Health Officer, Mississippi Department of Health, versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. Justice Alito delivered the opinion of the court. Abortion presents a profound moral issue on which Americans hold sharply convicting views. So, who cares? Alito, there's sharply conflicting views on gun ownership in this country, but Alito would probably say gun ownership is a constitutional right, so therefore profound moral issues or sharply convicting views of American citizens are irrelevant. Now, he would probably say, well, there's a difference, and we'll get to that in a second, because it's enumerated in the Constitution that you have the Second Amendment right. Abortion rights are not enumerated. We'll get there. I got there already in my video, but some believe fervently that a human person comes into being at conception and that abortion ends an innocent life. Again, beliefs are irrelevant, or should be irrelevant, but as we found out during the Hobby Lobby case, beliefs apparently can be stated as fact. What did the Hobby Lobby case do? It basically allowed Hobby Lobby was allowed to say that they believed that a birth control pill prevented the implantation of a created embryo, and as such is morally the same as an abortifacient. Now, they weren't required to prove that this was the case. This is not like, a religious belief like, I don't believe in mixing milk and meat. or I don't believe in doing work on the Sabbath. It's not, or if you're a Catholic, I guess you have to take communion. This is them stating a belief as fact. They stated that their belief was that this thing happened, and instead of being forced to show that that thing happened, they were allowed to just say, since we believe it's happened, in the case of this court, we're going to act as if it's true, even though there's no evidence that birth control pills cause an embryo that's already created to not be implanted in the uterine wall. So there used to be on the packaging used to say that birth control pills could prevent ovulation, fertilization, or implantation. That's what it used to say. But more recent science has not been able to find that third part to be true. They have not found any evidence of that. And with a lack of evidence, we shouldn't believe that to be a true statement. But Hobby Lobby was allowed to state that belief and have it be considered to be a true statement. I'm sure they believe. See, what should have happened in that case is that they should have had to prove that such a thing happens, and then it could be allowed to say, because this is proven to happen, we believe that that's morally equivalent to an abortion. Therefore, we should not be required to pay for birth control pills, which they don't. They never did. The employee's work did, but it's another story. You don't want to get distracted by that. But they were allowed to put a belief as fact instead of presenting a fact and saying, since this fact is so, our beliefs prevent us from funding these things. So, but apparently it's okay to state beliefs and have them be considered facts by the court, which is ridiculous. Let's see. Others feel strongly that any regulation of abortion invades a woman's right to control her own body and prevents women from achieving full equality. Now, when I've stated my aversion to this ruling and to anti-abortion bills, I try very hard to make my conversation to be gender neutral, because there are men who can't get pregnant, there are non-binary folks who can't get pregnant. This is very cis-normative language. I don't expect Justice Alito to be, respectful of trans folk. So when I state my personal opinions about this, I'm going to try very hard and I did in the last video, to basically say, look, we're going to talk about how reproductive rights are under assault. We're going to talk about how body autonomy is under assault in this country. We're going to talk about how abortion rights are under assault in this country. And of which many of the people who would seek those services are women. But there are many others who would be both trans folk or non-binary or gender fluid, etc. So we here at Libertarian Radio will be respectful of individuals' identities. And the only time I'm really going to, when I'm quoting the text, when I'm quoting the ruling, is when my language will be cis-normative, will be talking about, gender binary issues, because that's Alito's words. But in my own commentary, I'll try as best as I can to make sure that I'm being more inclusive than the justice here. So anyway, others feel just as strongly that any regulation of abortion invades a woman's right to control her own body and prevents women from achieving full equality, which is true. Because, if men could get pregnant, there would be abortion mills on every corner. Still, others in a third group think abortion should be allowed under some, but not all circumstances, and those within this group hold a variety of views about particular restrictions that should be imposed. Well, sure, and I think there are people who, for political reasons or whatever, maybe they really believe in one of the extremes or the other, but they can't say it because it's politically expedient to not say, like I say, that I'm 100% in favor of abortions without exception. Nobody is going to allow their pregnancy to last full 9 months and then right before birth say, you know what, I really don't feel like having this child. Let's get an abortion. No. If you're getting a late-term abortion, you're typically going to be in one of very few scenarios, i.e., it's either going to harm or kill you to deliver or have a C-section, and you need to remove the fetus at that point, or the fetus already has a condition where the fetus will die upon birth or will be stillborn, and there's no reason to force the individual to gestate for additional months unnecessarily. Nobody is sitting there waiting until month 8 and going, yep, I yeet the fetus, get rid of the fetus right now. No one's doing that. So there's no reason. Hide in the shadows says religion will take America down. It very well may. We may very well be seeing, go watch Handmaid's Tale might very well be a documentary at this point or soon if we don't take enough action about this stuff. Again, I feel my personal opinion is that abortion, 100%, no exceptions, should be allowed. I understand that there are people who believe that, there are people who ban abortions with some exceptions. There's some people who support most abortions with some exceptions, but I'm always going to support 100% abortion rights, no exceptions. There's the only legitimate regulations could potentially be on the clinics themselves, basically to require that they be as sterile as any other type of place, where you would have a medical procedure. If that's the case, that's fine, as long as it doesn't, place an undue burden on anybody. But it shouldn't having a clean clinic shouldn't place an undue burden on anybody. But that's part of. But you have to watch it, because that's in that Texas case, that was how they kind of weaseled around it. They were like, well, we're not banning abortion. We're just requiring, not the second Texas case, the first Texas case, the one where they tried to require the abortion doctors to have admitting rights in hospitals. In those cases, you had, they were trying to do an end around one way about abortion rights, and basically, oh, you can have it, but the doctor just needs to have something that he's never going to get. Ridiculous. Let's see. I agree. It's being pushed by religious groups to block them, and shady, infiltrated GOP groups use it to manipulate the religious people the way over, whatever. And I used to be kind of cynical in that I believed that there are many Republicans who didn't really want to ban abortion or didn't really want to get rid of abortion altogether, because once they do, they don't have a campaign issue anymore. If they lose one of the central planks of their campaigns, they needed abortion to be legal to fight it and to fundraise off of, because they're not pro-life by any stretch of the imagination. There's no pro-life about that. And if you notice, what I have here on the screen is not only have the text here. We'll get to the bottom text I have in a second. You'll see it's the 9th Amendment. So let's see, for the first 185 years of the adoption of the Constitution, each state was permitted to address this issue in accordance with the views of its citizens. Okay, this issue, but I would kind of roll that back and say, no. Once the 14th Amendment was passed, you created a situation where the federal government had the ability to overturn when states trampled on individual rights. And let's kind of go over the rights. Because, again, Amendment 9, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, which basically says that if something is not enumerated, you can't then say, well, it's not a right because it's not enumerated. No. Well, but there's also rights and their powers. And that's one of my big beefs with conservatives, is that they'll talk about states' rights as if states have rights. No, states don't have rights. States have powers. People have rights. And the state shouldn't have the state shouldn't have a power to trample over an individual's rights. That's how it should work. Unfortunately, you have people especially in the South, who like to conflate the two, and that's why they seceded, because they believed that that's the only way that they could maintain owning people. And the same type of thoughts maintain that the states have supposed rights to trample the individual rights of people. So I would disagree there with Alito that, once the 14th Amendment was passed, there was the idea that a state could just have carte blanche preventing actions was false. In 1973, Roe versus Wade, even though the Constitution makes no mention of abortion, the court held that it confers a broad right to obtain one. And again, just because it doesn't mention abortion doesn't mean you don't have the right to an abortion. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or to disparage others retained by the people. It did not claim that American law or the common law have ever recognized such a right, and its survey of history ranged from the constitutionally irrelevant discussion of abortion in antiquity to the plainly correct, the assertion that abortion was probably never a crime under common law, after cataloging a wealth of other information having no bearing to the meaning of the Constitution. Oh, you mean like people's beliefs? Hey, Wes Webb, thank you for joining us back on the show. Please remember to like to the video. I don't know if there are any commies here or not, Wes, but I'll let you be the judge of that, and we'll see. Anyway, so after cataloging a wealth of other information having no bearing on the meaning of the Constitution, again, just like you said, their beliefs of the individuals one way or the other. Individuals' beliefs of what should be a right or should be irrelevant as well. So here we go, hypocritical Justice Alito is complaining about irrelevancies when he discusses irrelevancies already. So he says, he continues on, the opinion concluded with a numbered set of rules much like those that might be found under statute enacted by a legislature. Under the scheme, each trimester of pregnancy was regulated differently, but the most critical line was drawn at roughly the end of the second trimester, which at the time corresponded to the point where as the fetus was thought to achieve, quote, viability, i.e. the ability to survive outside the womb. Although the court acknowledged that states had a legitimate interest in protecting potential life, it found this interest could not justify any restrictions on pre-viability abortions. The court did not explain the basis for this line, and even abortion supporters have found it hard to defend Roe's reasoning. I mean, I don't know how many abortion supporters have found it hard to defend Roe's reasoning. I know plenty of people who have supported abortion who supports Roe's reasoning. One prominent constitutional scholar wrote that he would vote for a statute very much like the one the court ended up drafting if he were a legislature, but his assessment of Roe was memorable and brutal. Roe was not constitutional law and gave almost no sense of obligation to try to be, except it was based on Griswold versus Connecticut, which is based on the privacy rights as well. So there's that, which, you know, again, privacy rights, there's no mention of the word privacy in the Constitution, but that doesn't mean we don't have a right to privacy, again, because the Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And why am I going to repeat that several times in this video? Here's why. It's because many conservatives claim to love the abortion. Many conservatives claim to love the Constitution. Many conservatives claim to be originalists or textualists or whatever, however they want to describe it. They love the text of the Constitution, but they forget the Ninth Amendment. And when they forget the Ninth Amendment, they basically are taking the Constitution and using it as toilet paper and wiping their own asses with it. Because you can't ignore the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment is essential. And textualists would hypocritically point to the documents, the Federalist Papers, to back up their arguments as to why they should believe what the text means. Of course, the textualist should say that the text should, on its face, mean what it says it means, but fine, they'll be hypocrites as well and talk about the Federalist Papers. And well, when they were drafting the Constitution, there were discussions about whether or not you needed a Bill of Rights. There are those who were opposed to the idea of the Bill of Rights. Why? Because they felt they were concerned that if you started enumerating the rights that people had, that people would be like, oh, well, these are all the rights that people have because these are only the ones that are enumerated, which is why we added the Ninth Amendment in, to protect all those other non-enumerated rights. Unfortunately, and those are probably the conservatives back then who were saying that, and now, of course, they, again, want to wipe their asses with the Constitution because they ignore the Ninth Amendment, because they don't like it, because it gets in their way of trampling individual people's rights. Let's see. If it gets votes at this time, the Conservative Party in USA, as at least one last one in the free world, was hit with the position to restructure, get out of the way. The rest of the free world conservatives, let's see. No, they interpret the text as if language does not change. Well, not necessarily. I mean, yes, they believe that. I mean, we can point to like the Second Amendment and what a well-regulated militia means. Have that discussion as to what they felt what they meant with that terminology based on that language back then. But this language is clear that you can't enumerate. You can't say that something is a right because it's not enumerated. But they forget it. So that's it. Continuing on with the draft text. At the time of Roe, 30 states still prohibited abortion in all stages. In the years prior to that decision, about a third of the states had liberalized their laws, but Roe abruptly ended that political process. It imposed the same highly restrictive regime on the entire nation, and it effectively struck down abortion laws in every state, as Justice Byron Wright put it in his dissent. The decision represented the exercise of raw judicial power, and it sparked a national controversy that has embittered our political culture for a half a century. Well, I mean, states, if the ability to obtain an abortion, either for the first 2 trimesters or whatever, is a right, then a state should not be able to trample that right. So a ruling from the Supreme Court under the 14th Amendment should be able to squash that right. Eventually, in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the court revisited Roe, but the members of the court split 3 ways. 2 justices expressed no desire to change Roe. 4 wanted to overrule the decision in its entirety, and the 3 who signed the controlling opinion took a third position. Their opinion did not endorse Roe's reasoning. It even hinted that one or more of its authors might have had reservations. But the opinion concluded that stare decisis, which calls for prior decisions to be followed in most instances, required adherence to what is called Roe's central holding that a state may not constitutionally protect fetal life before viability, even if that holding was wrong. Anything less, according to him, anything less than that opinion of the court would undermine the respect for this court and the rule of law. Paradoxically, according to Alito, the judgment in Casey did a fair amount of overruling. Several important abortion decisions were overruled in toto, rains down in Africa, I guess. And the Roe itself was overruled in part. Casey threw out Roe's trimester scheme and substituted a new rule of uncertain origin under which states were forbidden to adopt any regulation that imposed, quote, an undue burden on a woman's right to have an abortion. All rights have, you have the right to, Scalia's ruling in not the Holder case, in the case, D.C. Heller case. Scalia's opinion was that we have a right to bear arms under the Constitution, but that doesn't mean that it's an universal where you can't make any restrictions on gun ownership. So you can't put, so there are constitutional burdens that can't be put on gun owners. There would be constitutional burdens that a state wouldn't be able to prevent any right from taking place, regardless of it being enumerated or not. Let's see, suffer the little ones, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I thought you were going to start quoting Hamilton. Let's see. Let's see. The decision provided no clear guidance about the difference between a due and undue burden, but the 3 justices who authored the controlling opinion called the contending sides of a national controversy to end their national division by treating court's decision as the final sentiment of the question of the constitutional right to abortion. And so not only do we have one ruling, but we had another ruling that basically said, hey, most of what Roe said is true, so therefore there's another ruling in support of the individual right to have an abortion. As become increasingly apparent in the intervening years, Casey did not achieve his goal. America's continued to hold passionate and widely divergent views on abortion. Again, one's passionate and undiverging view has nothing to do with whether or not something should be a right or not. That's just bizarre that he believes that individuals, that a majority of the country should be able to feel a certain way and then trample on rights. What? Find a end around slavery, and if people believe that we should be able to have slaves again, but name them differently and say, oh, these are these people, not slaves, then it's okay because the majority of the people feel that it should be this way. No. The people, what is it? A pure democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, and a republic is a sheep getting veto power. Is that what it is? Yeah, something like that. Let's see. Some have recently enacted laws allowing abortion with few restrictions at all stages of pregnancy. Others have tightly restricted abortion beginning well before viability. And in this case, 26 states have expressly asked the court to overrule Roe and Casey to allow states to regulate or prohibit pre-viability abortions. As Alito continues to state, before us now is one such state law. State of Mississippi asks us to uphold the constitutionality of a law that generally prohibits abortion after the 15th week. Why the 15th week? I don't know. That's random. That's just out of the blue. 15 weeks, that's what we're going for. That's because they were attempting to chip away. They thought at 15 weeks they might be able to get Roberts on board. Several weeks before the point where the fetus is now regarded as viable outside the womb. In defending the law, state's primary argument was that we should reconsider and overrule Roe and Casey and once again allow each state to regulate abortions as its citizens wish. Why should citizens get to determine how people get to have individual body autonomy? I get to say whether or not my neighbors can put up a bigger fence. Well, there are zoning restrictions that might prevent your neighbors from putting up a bigger fence or not. And sometimes a fence is shared, so therefore there's a sort of a shared responsibility on maintaining that fence. But you don't get to say whether or not your neighbors can build a pool. Not that, a pregnancy should be compared with constructing a pool. Let's see. So, blah, blah, blah. On the other side, respondents of the Solicitor General ask us to reaffirm Roe and Casey, and they contend that the Mississippi law cannot stand if we do so. Allowing Mississippi to prohibit abortions after 15 weeks would be no different than overruling Casey and Roe entirely. They contend that no half measures are available and we must either reaffirm or overrule Roe, which I don't know if I would have argued that, but I would say, you know what, you could have had a half measure, and I would have allowed the half measure to take place because, at that point, not that I don't think Alito would have supported a half measure. We, and whoever we is, we're going to see, I guess, I don't know if it's included or not, who is included in this we, hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to an abortion. Again, I will cite the Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed or to deny or disparage others retained by the people, i.e., the fact that the Constitution doesn't reference abortion is irrelevant because there are non-enumerated rights according to the Founding Fathers. And if you don't respect the Ninth Amendment, then you're not a strict textualist. You cannot claim to be a textualist and make that argument right there. So Alito is not a textualist or an originalist. He is just taking the Constitution and wiping his ass with it. Let's see. No such rights is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one in which the defenders of Roe and Casey now rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, I would argue that perhaps the Due Process Clause does protect the right to an abortion, like it protects other things, like the right to privacy and many other rights. However, guess what? It shouldn't matter, because just the state should have to prove why it has the authority to prohibit an action. And the popular opinion of the electorate should not be a reason why an individual action should be prohibited. That's why, support legalization of drugs, legalization of marijuana. Because, again, just because the majority of the people feel like it should be illegal it shouldn't prevent an individual from taking the action that the individual wants to take when it comes to their own body. Let's see. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but any right must be, quote, deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. That's stupid. I mean, he's citing Washington versus Glucksberg for that, and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. Well, ordered liberty should include the idea that an individual has body autonomy, the ability to, but again, I guess this nation was not founded on the idea that individuals have body autonomy, because this nation was founded on slavery. It was the tradition of this country to own people. So the idea that, just because we have determined that it is unconstitutional to own people. We shouldn't have needed an amendment to do so, but apparently we did. We shouldn't have, people shouldn't get to vote on to prohibit individual actions. Let's see. Problem is some justices have been put in place that will push aside reality and push their religious beliefs. Yep, that's true. Go over some of that other stuff in a second. Let's see. The right to an abortion does not fall within its category. Well, of course he doesn't think so, but just because Alito says it doesn't make it true. Until the latter part of the 20th century, such a right was unknown in American law. Just because it was unknown in American law doesn't mean it shouldn't have been something. I mean, there are many things that have been unknown. I mean, we have the internet. Just because, the internet hasn't existed for the majority of this nation doesn't mean that the constitutional rights in using the internet don't exist. Government, if government wants to restrict access on the internet, government should have to prove why it has the authority to restrict such actions. And if it can't prove why it has the authority to restrict such actions, then those actions should be legal. It doesn't matter. You can't make an appeal to tradition. The appeal to tradition is a logical fallacy. So again, Alito making logical fallacies again. Because indeed, when the 14th Amendment was adopted, 3/4 of the states made abortion a crime at all stages of pregnancy. Appeal to tradition is a crime. Just because states did that, it doesn't mean, just several years before the adoption of the 14th Amendment, there were states that left the Union because they wanted to continue owning people. So just because the states made abortion a crime, it doesn't mean that that law was constitutional or should have been considered constitutional. Back to the ruling, the abortion right is also critically different from any other right that this court has held to fall within the 14th Amendment's protection of liberty. Roe's defenders characterize abortion right as similar to the rights of recognized past traditions involving matters such as intimate sexual relations, contraception, and marriage. Contraception is an important one there because there are people on the pro-life side who believe that oral contraception is abortifacients. So therefore, they would put contraception in with abortifacients. So according to them, to many of those people, contraception would be part of Roe. To them it's more tightly coupled. Now, as we said earlier on the program, contraception, it used to be the belief that birth control pills prevented fertilization, ovulation, fertilization, and implantation. There is no evidence that it prevents implantation of a created embryo. So again, because we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be allowing rulings to be based on people's beliefs. They should be based on facts. But again, the arguments that have been made, sexual relations and marriage, have all come from the same place of, people's feeling that they have the authority because they're the majority religion to enforce their religious beliefs on other people. But Alito believes that abortion is fundamentally different, as both Roe and Casey acknowledged, because it destroys what those decisions call fetal life, and what law is now described as unborn human being. Let's see. If you're a person, let's just pause for a second and state that the fetus should have all rights of personhood. So you should be able to write the fetus off on your taxes. You should that fetus should when the fetus starts aging, it should start at conception, not at birth. So therefore, you should be able to drive 9 months sooner. Let's just play that game. Let's just treat it as if it was a person, right? Okay. What other person is allowed to use your body without your consent for 9 months continuously, without continuous consent? There's no such other person who is allowed to do so. It's impossible. You can't find it because people have the right to body autonomy. So even if you want to grant full personhood to a fetus, which we don't, which I don't even know if he is doing at this point, it doesn't matter. Because even if you grant full personhood to a fetus, you can't force somebody to gestate for 9 months. Or you shouldn't be able to, because that's a matter of body autonomy. Now we get to hypocrite Alito. Let's see. Scary, it is not any of our business what a woman does, and it is religions that have worked its way into the political system. Keeps going, and the USA will be worse than the Middle East. Yep. Stare decisis, the doctrine on which Casey's controlling opinion was based, does not compel unending adherence to Roe's of judicial authority. Roe was egregiously wrong from the start, according to Alito. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and decision, according to Alito, and the decisions had bad, damaging consequences, according to Alito. And far from bringing around a national settlement on the abortion issue, Roe and Casey have an inflamed debate and deep division. That's like blaming Obama for separating the country. No, it's not Roe and Casey that has deepened division. It's the fact that you have people who think that they have the right to tell you what to do with your body. It's time to heed the Constitution. Yes, I agree, Alito. It's time to heed the Constitution. Something that you're not doing. You're not heeding the Constitution because you're ignoring the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. You're ignoring the Ninth Amendment by so-called heeding the Constitution. Time to return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. No, why? There's no reason to. Elected representatives shouldn't get to vote on rights. Rights should never be up for a vote. No, elected representatives should be able to decide what the tax rate's going to be so that we can determine roads and bridges and what zoning should be and at the federal level what, power should be granted, to be able to, conduct trade and treaties and all that other good stuff. You have the powers that are granted to the state governments via the 10th Amendment that are not restricted to it from any other amendment. It's fine. Those powers are what the elected representatives get to do. The elected representatives should never get to decide on individual rights. Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse is apparently late to this show. Mighty Mouse 1111 says it's not in the Constitution. I will point you again to the bottom of the screen. The Ninth Amendment of the Constitution states the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. I.e., just because it's not written in the Constitution doesn't make it a right, or doesn't make it not a right. That's how it is. That's what your founders wrote. The founding fathers put that in the Constitution because they knew somebody would come in, like yourself, and say, well, it's not written in the Constitution, so therefore it's not a right. Because the founding fathers would have found that idea morally abhorrent. The founding fathers, even though they owned people, and I'm not, patting the founders on the back because they were highly flawed individuals, but the founding fathers that conservatives love to embrace, so smart, such smart people, they knew that people like you would exist. They knew that people would say, well, here we've enumerated these rights, like the right to free speech, the right to the press, the right to redress your government, the right to assemble, the right to freedom of religion, the freedom to bear arms, the right to not be unreasonably searched. We have all these rights that are enumerated in the Constitution, so therefore that must be an exhaustive list. They knew that people like you would say that. So they wrote the Ninth Amendment to stop y'all from saying it. But instead of being like, the founding fathers have said the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So therefore, it would be silly of me to make an argument that it's not in the Constitution, so therefore it's not a right. But no, y'all just go from 8 to 10. You're working in base 9, I guess, where your system goes from 8 to 10. You skip 9 altogether, because once you get to 8, base 9, you would become 1-0, whatever. If abortion is illegal, then no premarital sex. Well, I would highly encourage that if you are somebody who is able to gestate and you are in a red state, I would just definitely consider just saying, nope, I can't have control over my body, so you don't get to have sex with me. Punish these conservatives by not giving them any nookie. You say, amend the Constitution or give it to the states. No, you don't have to amend the Constitution. This Constitution is clear. The 10th Amendment grants powers to the states. Powers are not the same as rights. The 9th Amendment protects all non-enumerated rights. So the Constitution says that, hey, you states, you get to control all the things that the federal government doesn't get to control, but it doesn't mean you get to control rights. It doesn't mean you get to stop individual actions. And the 14th Amendment gives the federal government the authority to come in and say, squish. No, you can't. This law is not viable. You can't have this law because it denies the individuals in your state, the persons in your state, equal protection under the law. You can't do this. You can't. This is not something that is legal for you to do. And the 14th Amendment gives the federal government the power to stop states from trampling over individual rights. But what the Supreme Court has done is ignored the 14th Amendment. It ignores the 9th Amendment. Even though Alito claims to heed the Constitution, you're ignoring vital parts of that Constitution. But let's see. Yes, you do. Look at our situation in this country. It needs a law one way or the other. It doesn't matter. We do need a law. Why do we need a law? Do I need a law to breathe? Do I need a law to walk down the street? Do I need law? This is a conservative here. I'm assuming you're a conservative, Mighty Mouse. Let me do that. Here I come to save the day. Sorry. Here's Mighty Mouse coming in saying that we need laws to... What? To do anything? Do I need a law to wipe my ass with the Constitution? Because no one thinks like you on abortion. Well, maybe they should. Maybe they should think like me on abortion. But here's the thing. People should have the right to think about anything when it comes to abortion. Anything. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get to have to make a law to defend a right. Like, was Lawrence v. Texas was the law that prohibited gay sex, prohibited sodomy. It was preventing people from having consensual sexual relationships. When the Supreme Court overturned Lawrence v. Texas, guess what? They didn't have to make a new law to allow sex to happen between gay people. It was just allowed to happen between consenting folks. 2 or more people consent to a sexual act, boom, it's fine. Now, the law does have a rational basis to set up like age of consent laws and stuff like that, and that's cool, because you don't want adults preying on children like the Republican Party does. John Rose, Republican John Rose. Sorry. So was it half? What half? Half of Americans don't think like you do, but it doesn't matter. If half of the Americans don't believe in abortion, then they don't have to have one. That's the thing. That's the great thing about rights, is you don't have to take advantage of it. If marijuana suddenly became legal tomorrow, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to go out and smoke a blunt. Some might not. Once they overturned Lawrence v. Texas, there were still plenty of people in Texas who didn't agree with the idea that men should be sleeping with men, women should be sleeping with women, or what have you. They only believed in heterosexual relationships. But just because Lawrence v. Texas happened doesn't mean that everybody had to go get one. You don't want to have gay sex? Don't have gay sex. That's how rights work. You don't have to take advantage of them all just because you have them. And you shouldn't need laws to enable people to have rights. Rights should be innate. I can't believe a conservative in this chat is making this argument, because it's always conservatives who will typically make the argument, rights don't come from government. Rights are natural rights. So what is it? Do you believe that that rights have to be given to people by law now that this abortion issue has come up? Are y'all switching your minds up and saying, no, we don't believe? The Constitution doesn't grant rights. And I'll say, I've said that. The Constitution doesn't grant rights. The Constitution protects rights. Because individuals should have the right to do whatever it is they want to do, as long as they're not harming anybody else. And individuals with other people should be able to do what they want to do, as long as everyone involved is able to consent to such activities. It's all about consent. Now, the Constitution can protect those things, because unfortunately, as we see in other governments, like in Putin's Russia, you don't have the freedom of the press. You don't have freedom of speech. You speak out against your government, you're taken away. You're taken to Gulag. They take you away to the Siberia. You work the mines over there. You don't see your family ever again. So we decided to enumerate such things because there are people who would say, well, it's not written in the Constitution, so therefore it's not a right. But again, we made sure to say, again, Ninth Amendment, not everything has to be enumerated in order for it to be right. Another life is I've talked about this. Wait, Wes Webb, you said endowed by our Creator. No, that's not the words. The words are endowed by their Creator. So it's not our Creator, it's their Creator. So if you believe that your Creator are your parents who gave birth to you by having sex, or that if your Creator is nature, or if your Creator is God, or if your Creator is some other deity, whatever that individual's, the Constitution was written in a way that allows each individual to determine who or what that Creator was. But by whatever means you were created, that endowed you with certain inalienable rights, like the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Alan Drifter. Shout out to Alan Drifter, one of the Liberal Dan Radio patrons. If you want to support the Liberal Dan Radio podcast, Liberal Dan Radio, you can go to Patreon at liberaldan.com to support the show as little as $3 a month. But thank you, Alan Drifter, for coming into the chat. And he is with him, Demonox, Cesar out in California, and Angie across the pond all support the show. Thank you very much for that. Just want to throw that out there. See, I hear that rationale hide in the shadows. I can get along with that if that is what we decide as our law. I'm not sure what you're talking about when it comes to that. See, hide in the shadows. I would beg to differ. As a fetus, until it can sustain its continued formations on its own, is not a life, as it is cell mutations. I mean, it's possible. But again, even if the fetus was a full person, even if you wanted to grant full personhood to the fetus, meaning you get to write it off on your taxes that year, meaning that you get to, the fetus gets to get its, once it becomes 18, well, it's now 18 9 months earlier, so therefore it can drive earlier. So maybe you want to alter your driving laws to make it 17, so you don't have two young people driving on the streets. No person has the ability to use the body of another person without their continuous consent. If you're saying that the fetus is a person, you're saying that that person has and you're saying that the person that people don't have the right to obtain an abortion. What you're then saying is that you have a situation where an individual person can use the body of another without continuous consent for 9 whole months. That doesn't fly with me. That's not okay. Not okay at all. Back to the ruling. Let's see. Katzenjam. It's so weird that they have been hollering for freedom and their rights, but they are so ready to throw it away and affects their sons and daughters and grandsons. Absolutely. Absolutely. They are more than happy to throw it all away. Because just to own the libs, as they like to call it. They want to own the libs. But they also want to placate their base, and part of their base is pro-life, and they see this opportunity. And look, I'm going to take this opportunity to pat myself on the back for a second and remind everybody that before the 2016 election, I was warning everybody. I said, look, we need to make sure to get out and vote because Donald Trump could name 3 Supreme Court nominees, and everyone called me crazy. That would never happen. Trump would never get to name 3. He'll get to name the one that they stole from Obama, and that's it. Nope, but then they got Kennedy to, resign early, and then they got Ginsburg. They were able to have Ginsburg die beforehand. I'm not blaming anybody's for the death of Ginsburg, but still, he got his 3, which has fundamentally changed the structure of the court into a activist conservative one. See, so back to the ruling by Alito. It's time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to people's elected representatives. No, The permissibility of abortion and limitations upon it are to be resolved like most important questions in our democracy. Any conservative who wants to now make the argument that we don't live in a democracy, who supports this ruling, is going to be a hypocrite. Why? We're not a democracy, we're not a democracy, we're not a democracy. But here is Alito saying we're in a democracy. So what is it? Are we a democracy or are we not a democracy? Make up your damn minds. By citizens trying to persuade one another and then voting. From Casey, Scalia concurring in judgment in part and dissenting in part. This is what the Constitution and the law demand. No, the Constitution does not demand that we deliberate and persuade each other about rights. No. If the Bill of Rights would not have been in the Constitution, I guess we'll go back and do a little history, some more. If the Bill of Rights would not have been put into the Constitution, because, again, some founders believed that it was ridiculous to put the Bill of Rights in the Constitution because nobody should have to be told that you have the right to freedom of speech. But if you didn't put that in there, then freedom of speech would be debated just like this. And people would have been persuaded on how we should, regulate speech and at the state level. And people in one state might have different speech rights than another state. Because you were allowing the masses to debate rights. The masses should never get to debate rights. Mighty Mouse, we are a republic with democratic elections. Yeah, we agree. I've said that repeatedly to people. I once had an amusing chat when I was much younger. I was a Democrat arguing that we were a republic, arguing with a Republican who was saying that we're a democracy. But I was like, yeah, we are a democratic republic. We are a republic in that we elect elected officials to decide things on our behalf, but we are a democracy in that we decide who those people are democratically. And we decide some other issues democratically as well on the state and local levels. Like the other day, we had a millage conversation, so we had a vote on a millage. That was something that was given to the people to decide whether or not the people wanted to be taxed on this millage or not to fund education, and it passed. So that's one way that but that's not a right. That's determining whether or not you want to spend money in order to support a program. That's not whether or not we have a right to do something. And that's an extreme issue that I guess the conservatives seem to think that it's bizarre to me that conservatives now believe that you should get to vote on rights. I guess they always have, technically. Let's see. At issue in this case is Mississippi's Gestational Age Act, except in medical emergency or in the case of severe fetal abnormality, which some of these rules don't have, by the way. A person shall not intentionally or knowingly perform or induce an abortion of an unborn human being if the probable gestational age of the unborn human being has been determined to be greater than 15 weeks. To support this act, the legislature made a series of factual findings. I don't know what those, I don't know how they determine whether or not it's factual. Let's see. At the time of enactment, only 6 countries besides the United States permitted non-therapeutic or elective abortion on demand after the 20th week. Okay, so 20th week is not 15th week. Legislature then found that at 5 or 6 weeks, an unborn human being's heart begins beating. It's not technically true. It's a blood vessel that starts pumping that eventually becomes the heart. It's not a full-fledged heart. If the heart's beat, if you had a miscarriage at that point, you probably wouldn't even know. You're not going to know. You're just going to miscarry. You might just feel that it's a heavier flow period. At 8 weeks, the unborn human being begins to move in the womb. Okay, again, reflexive movement is not a sign that the fetus should be able to reside outside. The fetus should be able to take up shop for 9 months. At 9 weeks, all basic physiological functions are present. Okay, sure. I'm sure there are some that come later, but at 10 weeks, vital organs begin to function. So at 9 weeks, all physiological functions are present. At 10 weeks, vital organs begin to function. Which is it? It's contradictory in and of itself. And hair, fingernails, and toenails begin to form. Have you ever heard of a dermoid tumor? A dermoid tumor is an interesting thing. is when the ova, when an egg fertilizes itself, and it then grows things like hair and teeth and nails. It's gross. It's really gross. A dermoid tumor is kind of disgusting. Look it up. I used to work in the pathology department at a hospital, delivering lab reports whilst I was in college. Is how I paid the bills during some of my undergraduate time at college. There were reports of these dermoid tumors. I even read one of them. It's quite interesting. Yeah, they fertilize itself. Hair, fingernails, toenails, teeth. It doesn't mean that it's a living being. That's worthy of legal protection. So that you have hair, fingernails, and teeth, or toenails, is irrelevant. An unborn human being's diaphragm is developing. It's developing. It's not formed, but it's developing. He or she, again, cis-normative language, may move about freely in the womb. And the unborn human being has taken on the human form in all relevant aspects. Let's see if I can pull this up. Let's see. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick. No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Weeks. 12 weeks. I'm not finding the image that I was looking for, but it's a common image that goes all over the internet, where they'll tell a conservative, they'll be like, "Hey, when should a human be able to abort this?" And they'll say, "Oh, never." And it's like, "Well, yeah, that's true, never, because it's not a human fetus. It's like it's a hippopotamus fetus or what have you." Let's see. Wes Webb says, "We are miracles. So are ants." Yeah. So are you gonna stop people from stomping ants? Wes Webb, I'm sorry you don't like the word cis. Cis does not mean comfortable in skin. Cis comes from science, where cis is the opposite of trans. It comes from the Greek. Cis means same, trans means different. So that's where the cis versus trans comes from. So hide in the shadows. This goes beyond parties or religion to me. It's too controversial and needs to have a... No, it doesn't need to have a law. It needs to have... Because, look, once you start down that road of this right needs to have a law about it, then what other rights need to have laws about it? We're going to start making laws about sexual activities because people find them immoral. Start cracking down on polyamorous relationships or sexual things that some people find to be immoral. No? Yes? Maybe? I don't know. Let's see. It found that most abortions after 15 weeks employed dilation and evacuation procedures, which involved the use of surgical instruments to crush and tear the unborn child. Blah, blah, blah. Intentional commitment of these acts for non-therapeutic or elective reasons is a barbaric practice, dangerous. That's them editorializing over what it is. I mean, if you're going to, just because you're removing it by ripping the fetus apart, it doesn't mean that it's harming or you're hurting anything, because you can't feel. Respondents are an abortion clinic, Jackson's Women's Health Organization, one of its doctors. On the day the Gestational Age Act was enacted, respondents filed suit. Mississippi officials alleging that the act violated the court's precedents. District Court granted summary judgment in favor of the respondents and permanently enjoined enforcement of the act, stating that viability marks the earliest point at which the state's interest in fetal life is constitutionally adequate, which is what Roe did. 15 weeks gestational age is prior to viability. The Fifth Circuit affirmed, which is weird, because the Fifth Circuit is the most conservative circuit in the nation, and the fact that the Fifth Circuit affirmed, we granted certiorari to resolve the question of whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. Petitioner's primary defense of the Mississippi gestational age is that Roe v. Casey are wrongly worded and the act is constitutional because it satisfies rational basis review. Okay. Respondents answered that following Mississippi to ban pre-viability abortions would be no different than overruling Roe Casey and Roe entirely. They tell us no half measures are available. We must either reaffirm or overrule Roe Casey. Again, I wouldn't have said that, but hey. If we need a law for suicide, we need a law for abortion. Well, we can have that discussion too, because if you're in a part where your quality of life is so bad that you in a rational mind may want to end your life prematurely, then I don't believe the government has the right to tell you not to do so. I think it's ironic that sometimes somebody's trying to kill themselves and the police can use deadly force to stop them from doing so. Doesn't make sense. If somebody's not in their right mind, then yeah, maybe they should be prevented from committing suicide. But Dr. Kevorkian, it was very controversial way back in the day. But the idea that people should be able to have some dignity at the end of their life and who don't want to suffer, I think that should be absolutely legal, and you shouldn't be preventing people from doing so. Wes Webb, I do not trust the direction a true democracy might take us. I agree with you, Wes. I agree with you. I do not trust what a, quote, true democracy would allow us to do. Because, again, two wolves and a sheep arguing what's for dinner, right? The people who are disenfranchised, the people who are minorities, will stay minorities and stay disenfranchised and stay marginalized. We begin considering the critical question whether the Constitution, properly understood, confers a right to obtain an abortion. Skipping over that question. What? We begin by considering that if the Constitution, properly understood, confers a right to abortion, and then we're going to skip over the question? What? The controlling opinion in Casey reaffirmed Roe's central holding based solely on the doctrine of stare decisis, but as we will explain, proper application of stare decisis required an assessment of the strength of the grounds on which Roe is based, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, turn to the question that the Casey plurality did not consider. We addressed first the question that 3 steps. First, we explained the standard that our cases have used in determining whether the 14th Amendment's reference to liberty protects a particular right. Second, we examined whether or not the issue nation's history. Again, nation's history should be irrelevant. That's an appeal to tradition. That's a logical fallacy. Finally, we consider whether a right to obtain an abortion is supported by other precedents. Griswold, perhaps. Griswold v. Connecticut is maybe one precedent that would support the constitutional right. I'm sure he'll find some way to disagree with that. Let's see. Mighty Mouse goes, hey, what do you think of this sparking Civil War II? I don't know if this will spark Civil War II or not. I think another attempted coup by Trump or Republicans, and that's a whole different video series, might do that, but, it's not what we're trying to talk about tonight. Constitutional analysis must be the language of the instrument, which offers a fixed standard for asserting what our founding documents means. The Constitution makes no express reference to a right to an abortion, but the Constitution states the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So therefore, you can't make that argument, or you shouldn't be making that argument if you respect the Constitution. So clearly, Alito, again, does not respect the Constitution. Those who claim it protects such a right must show that a right somehow is implicit. Oh my God. Wow. In order for an individual to say that they have a right, they have to prove that they have a right. Instead of how it should work is that government should have to prove that it has the authority to prevent an action. You're putting the burden on the individuals, not on the government? And you're a conservative, Alito? Ha! That's crazy. There are protests forming outside the Supreme Court right now. Excellent. It's good to hear. There should be. They'll be peaceful, probably, unlike January 6th. Roe, however, was remarkably loose in his treatment of the constitutional text. It held that the abortion right was, which not as, again, he's so obsessed with the fact that it's not mentioned in the Constitution. It doesn't have to be a right. And that privacy right, Roe observed, had been found to spring from no fewer than 5 different constitutional provisions: 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th. Well, look, he mentioned the 9th. It's because of somebody else mentioning the 9th, but at least he mentioned the 9th. The court's discussion left up open at least 3 ways in which some of those combinations could protect the abortion right. One possibility was founded in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people. Yeah, okay. Another was that the right was rooted in the 1st, 4th, or 5th Amendments, some combination of these provisions, that this right had been incorporated into the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, just as many other Bill of Rights provisions had been when they were incorporated, i.e. when they incorporated the 14th Amendment onto the states. Third path was that the 1st, 4th, and 5th Amendments played no role, and that the right was simply a component of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Roe's feeling, again, he puts feeling in quotes here, but he doesn't put feeling in quotes other places, or beliefs. I guess beliefs and feelings are different. Was the provision that did not work, but the message seemed to be that the abortion right could be found somewhere in the Constitution, and that specifying its exact location was not of paramount importance. Casey Court did not defend this unfocused analysis, and said grounded his decision solely on the theory that the right to obtain abortion is part of the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. We discussed this theory in depth below, but before doing so, we briefly discussed what additional constitutional provision. Some of the respondents' amici have offered yet another potential home for the abortion right, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Neither Roe nor Casey saw fit to invoke this theory, and it's squarely foreclosed by our precedents, which established that a state's regulation of abortion is not sex-based classification and thus can't be subject to the heightened scrutiny that applies to such classifications. I mean, if you're going to make the argument that, if you're going to be applying to modern gender classifications where, people, understand that, there are people who are not women who get pregnant, then maybe that's an argument to be made. I don't know. But the regulation of a medical procedure that only one sex can undergo does not trigger heightened constitutional scrutiny unless the regulation is a mere pretext designed to effect an individuous discrimination against members of one sex or the... Well, I mean, what do you think they're trying to do? What do you think they're trying to prevent, as they would say, they're trying to prevent women from obtaining an abortion. They're not trying to stop men from, avoiding parenthood. And as the court has stated, the goal of preventing abortion does not constitute individually discriminatory amicus against women. Yeah, whatever. Laws regulating or prohibiting abortion are not subject to heightened scrutiny. Rather, they are governed by the same standard of review by other health and safety measures. We turn to Casey's bold assertion that abortion is right is aspect of liberty protected by the Due Process Clause. Underlying theory under which this argument rests is 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause provides substantive and procedural protection for liberty, but our decisions have held that the Due Process Clause protects 2 categories of substantive rights. The first consists of rights guaranteed by the first 8 amendments, but the court held that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment incorporates the great majority of those rights and makes them equally applicable to states. The second category, which is the one in question here, compromises a select list of fundamental rights that are not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. In deciding whether a right falls into either one of these categories, the court has long asked whether the right is deeply rooted in our history and tradition. Again, that's an appeal to fallacy. That is a logical the appeal to tradition, which is a logical fallacy. He seems to be repeating himself a lot. And he also seems to be repeating himself a lot. Justice Ginsburg's opinion for the court in Timms versus Indiana, concluding that the 8th Amendment's protection against excessive fines is fundamental to our scheme of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. Her opinion traced back to the Magna Carta, blah, blah, blah. Just because some people have traced things back to tradition doesn't mean that all traditions are good. That's one of the problems. Let's see, you all are crazy. Let's see. Are you including me in the all of us being crazy? Is Wes also included in all of us being crazy? Let's see. A similar inquiry are undertaken in McDonald's Super, which held that the 14th Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms. The lead opinion surveyed the origins of the Second Amendment. blah blah blah. I'm sure they're gonna say nation's history, tradition, appeal to tradition, blah blah blah. Timms and McDonald concerned questions of the 14th Amendment disguised with the first 8. So Glucksberg, which held the due process clause does not confer a right to assisted suicide. We're getting the assisted suicide part. The court served more than 700 years of Anglo-American common law tradition and made clear that a fundamental right must be objectively deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. Again, appeal to tradition. Appeal to tradition is a logical fallacy. We're going to skip forward a little bit because we're not going to do all 98 pages. So we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit. On occasion, when the court has ignored the appropriate limits imposed by respect of the teaching of history, it has fallen into the freewheeling judicial policymaking that characterized discredited decisions. The court must not fall prey to such unprincipled approach. Instead, guided by the history and tradition that map the essential components of our nation's concept of ordered liberty, we must ask what the 14th Amendment means by the term liberty when we engage in that inquiry in the present case. It is clear that the 14th Amendment does not protect the right to an abortion. Why? I mean, the right to have autonomy over one's body, to me, would be the extremist form of liberty. But hey, obviously I disagree with Justice Alito. Oh, Reed, as I fell asleep, you will be tonight's ASMR? What is ASMR? Not exactly sure. Maybe I'm just forgetting what that acronym means. I don't know. Until the latter part of the 20th century, there's no support in American law for constitutional rights to retain abortion. Doesn't matter. Should not matter. Just again, because you should not be able to appeal to tradition to prevent a right from happening. For the first half of our country's history, or so, maybe a little less, there was the belief that we could hold slaves. That's American tradition, right? Let's all applaud American traditions. Yay. So a few years before Roe handed down, no federal state court had recognized such a right. Just because they haven't doesn't mean that they shouldn't have, or should have not done so. But it had long been a crime in every single state. At common law, abortion was criminal, at least in some states, of pregnancy, and regarded as unlawful and would have been severe consequences at all stages. Blah, 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 statutory, blah, 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 1800s, blah, blah, blah. Because, everything we did in the 1800s was great, right? Roe either ignored or misstated history, and Casey declined to consider Roe's faulty historical analysis. Therefore, it's important to set the record straight, which I'm sure you won't do because you've already ignored the 9th Amendment many times. We begin with the common law under which abortion was a crime, at least after quickening, after the first felt movement in the fetus womb, which usually occurs between the 16th and 18th week of pregnancy. Henry de Bracton's 13th century treatise explained that if a person has struck a pregnant woman or has given her poison whereby he has caused an abortion, if the fetus is be already formed and animated, and particularly if it be animated, he commits homicide. Wow. So we're using as a basis of a constitutional amendment something from the 13th century? Wow. That's just wow. Sir Edward Coke's 17th century treatise likewise asserted that abortion of a quick child was murder if the child be born alive, and a great misprison if the child dieth in her body. Institutes. So again, these are not our nation's laws. Our nation didn't exist. So why should we be using archaic and antiquated laws to justify what we have as laws today? It's malarkey. I should have worn my Joe Biden no malarkey shirt, because that, my friends, is malarkey. So Alito is going to go back to ye olden times to defend ye prevention of abortions. Let's see. Although pre-quickening abortion was not itself considered homicide, it does not follow that abortion was permissible at common law, much less as abortion was a legal right. Quite to the contrary, in 1732 case, when was this nation found? 1776, the Constitution. Afterwards, 1789, was it? I mean, maybe I have that wrong. 1732 is before we were a country. 1602, before we were a country. We're not a country at that point. Why should laws from before our country took place have any relevance in our system of laws now? We specifically seceded from England because we didn't like their laws. We said, to your laws. We don't want your laws. We're going to make our own laws. Screw your laws. That's what we said when we revolted, right? Is that true? Isn't that what we did? I mean, so why then should we be using the laws from the countries that we revolted from, that we had a revolution against, that we successfully kicked their asses and became our own country? Why should we be using those countries' laws in our judicial opinions? I'm sorry, but that just doesn't make sense to me at all. Heine says, once we hit the end of the age group where many parents think their kids are being rebellious when they just don't realize that critical mass is closed off from recording engrams without resistance, this is what causes kids to start questioning and have doubts about their parents' statements more often. Okay. They're just talking about parenting or whatever. Okay. Let's see. If one shoots A and misses him but kills B, this is murder because of the previous felonious intent. The law transfers one to the other. The same as the case where one lights poison for A and B, against whom the prisoner had no malice or intent, takes it and kills him. This is likewise murder. So also, if one gives a woman with child medicine to procure abortion and operates to violently kill the woman, this is murder in the person who gave it. Okay, I mean, if she takes it, I don't know if it's murder. If she consents to it, then it wouldn't be murder, I wouldn't think. If she dies, according to, again, using the cisnormative language of these previous rulings or laws or whatever. We finally went to this country. He's finally made it to this country. District of Columbia versus... I thought I was reaching by bringing up Heller in this conversation. I thought, it's kind of weird that I'm bringing up Heller, but I will anyway. He brought up Heller. Of course he brought up Heller. And of course he's probably going to bring up Heller in some bizarre, contrived way. The most important early American edition of Blackstone's Covenant, District of Columbia versus Heller, reported Blackstone's statement that abortion of a quick child was at least a heinous misdemeanor. What? Was he having a stroke right there? Heller was about gun rights. Okay. Okay, apparently, did Heller talk about abortion, I guess? I don't know. That's weird. Manuals for Justice, I mean, I haven't read the entirety of Heller. I'm aware of it. I know that, what it says, what the ruling implies. I knew that even Obama agreed with Scalia's ruling. Manuals for Justice for the Peace, printed in colonies in the 18th century, typically restated the common law rule on abortion, and some manuals repeated Hale and Blackstone's statements that anyone who prescribed medication to unlawfully destroy a child will be guilty of murder if the woman died. Okay, so if the woman dies, it's murder, but it's not murder if the woman doesn't die and a termination of the pregnancy happens, using, again, the antiquated laws on gender that we would discuss in the 1700s. Let's see. Original ground for drawing a distinction between pre and post quickening is not entirely clear. Still have about 11 viewers. It's not bad. We're keeping up. Oh wait. We're starting to talk about Jewish stuff. Wait, let me take a break from that. Let me take a break from the rule. I need to scroll back in the chat to see what Jewish, what we're talking about with Jewish stuff, because I'm Jewish. The initial area of the brain, that's there. Joshua and Jesus both mean leader. Jesus was named Joshua over 2,000 years ago. Human beings changed his name. The Jews' language has been remarkably consistent. I mean, the Jews' language has been remarkably consistent. The Jewish language also calls what some people consider to be a virgin, is in the original Hebrew, is young woman, but I don't think we're ready for that conversation here at this point. Billy the Kid. This is karma for stealing the election from. No, it's karma for the people who didn't go out and vote for Hillary in 2016, who went from Bernie to Trump in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But even then, I don't think it should be considered karma, because people shouldn't be punished because of election results. And the election was not stolen, Billy the Kid. The election was not stolen. That is a lie. Or that is actually, I'm sorry. Maybe you believe it to be true. If you believe it to be true, it's not a lie. But it is a false statement. I need to hold myself to my own standards. Solicitor General offers different explanation to the basis for the quickening rule. Namely, that before quickening, the common law did not regard the fetus as having a separate independent existence. Brief for the United States. But the case on which the Solicitor General relies, his proposition also suggested that criminal law's quickening rule was out of step with the treatment of prenatal life in other areas of law, blah, blah, blah. The original ground for the quickening rule is a little importance for present purposes because the rule was abandoned in the 19th century. Then why are we talking about it? Why are we talking about a rule that was abandoned in the 19th century? In 1803, the British Parliament, we rebelled from Britain. We don't have... What the British Parliament... Why are we quoting the British Parliament? Why? See Lord Ellenborough's Act 43 GL 3C58. One scholar has represented Parliament's decision may partially have been attributable to the medical man's concern that fetal life should be protected by the law at all stages of gestation. Why are we talking about Britain? Why is Alito talking about... I don't care what Britain says about abortion. I mean, I would hope that British law would support the right of people to have body autonomy and would uphold reproductive rights. I would hope that every country would uphold reproductive rights. But the system of laws in jolly old England should have no bearing on the laws in this country. So why are we discussing it? Why is he discussing it? It makes no sense. This country during the 19th century, the vast majority of the states enacted statutes criminalizing abortion, blah, blah, blah. By 1868, by the 14th Amendment was ratified, 3/4 of the states had enacted statutes making abortion a crime, even if it was performed before the quickening. One of the 9 states had not yet criminalized abortion. All but one did so by 1910. Okay, so at one point, every state was like, no, women don't have control over their own bodies. Shocking. They had just gotten over saying, okay, fine, black people have control over their own bodies, sort of. I mean, we weren't all that great of a country when we treated black people as property. We didn't treat women all that great for a long time, and apparently we're still not doing so, because reproductive rights is clearly not something that we're maintaining in a strong way. The trend in the territories that would become the last 13 states was similar. All of them criminalized abortion. Okay, fine. That doesn't mean that those were correct. Overwhelming consensus endured until the day Roe was decided. At that time, also by the court Roe's own count, a substantial majority still prohibited abortion in all case stages, except for the life of the mother. Again, their language of the antiquated, gender roles and biases, whatever. The inescapable conclusion is that the right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. On the contrary, an unbroken tradition of prohibiting abortion on pain of criminal punishment persisted from the earliest. Again, an appeal to tradition. This entire ruling is a logical fallacy. And also cites British law. What they did in the House of Commons or the House of Lords should have no part in what we decide in American law, because we fight a bloody revolution against them. Okay, still talking about Bible. Respondents in their own amici have no persuasive answer to this historical evidence, blah, blah, blah. Neither respondents nor the Solicitor General disputes the fact that by 1868, the vast majority of states criminalized abortions. Okay, again, just because it was criminalized at some point doesn't make those laws right. Again, it was legal to own people up until a few years prior to that. So don't come to me and tell me, oh, what this country did in 1868 was somehow should dictate what goes on today, because the people back there sucked too. Ugh. Few of the respondents advocate muster historical arguments, but are very weak. Solicitor General repeats Rowe's claim that it was doubtful abortion was ever firmly established in common law crime, even with respect to the deconstruction of a quick fetus. Was it like the Flash? Well, just the quickening. It's the Highlander. That's right. There can be only one. Instead of following these authorities, Rowe relied largely on 2 articles by a pro-abortion advocate who claimed that Koch had intentionally misstated the common law because of his strong anti-abortion views. These articles have been discredited, and it has come to light that even members of Jane Rowe's legal team did not regard them as serious. If he mentions that Jane Rowe now is pro-life, I'm going to flip. History supports the abortion right because common law's failure to criminalize abortion before the quickening means that at the founding, for decades after, women generally could terminate the pregnancy, at least in its early stages. The legislature began to exercise that authority. With the century we're on, no one, as far as we're aware, argued that laws enacted violated a fundamental right. Blah, blah, blah. We're only on page 28. Another amicus brief resort to the argument. Here, the arguments about legislative motive not even based on statements about legislators. He's criticizing the arguments about legislative motive on statements not made by legislators. Alito's citing British Parliament. Come on. We're going to talk about Oliver Cromwell next. What did Oliver Cromwell say about the whole thing over there in jolly old England? What Mary Queen of Scots? What did she have to say? Is there some German, law? Are we gonna cite other laws from other parts of Europe as well? Or just gonna go back to jolly old England because that's who we rebelled from? At the adoption of the 14th Amendment, over 3/4 of states adopted. He keeps repeating. He repeats himself, and then he repeats himself, and then repeats himself again. There is ample evidence that the passage of these laws was instead spurred by a sincere belief that abortion kills a human being. Okay. That doesn't justify it. One may disagree with this belief, and our decision is not based on any review of what the state should regard prenatal life as having rights or legally cognizable interests. Sure. But again, if the states do regard prenatal life as having rights, as equal rights to a person, then that no person has the right to use the body of another without continuous consent, except, I guess, for, in this case, apparently whenever this becomes official. We see no reason to discount the significance of state laws in question based on these amici discussions about legislative motive. Instead of seriously pressing the argument about the abortion right itself as deep roots, supporters of Roe and Casey contend that the abortion right is an integral part of a broader entrenched right. Roe termed this right as the right to privacy. Casey described it as the right or the freedom to make intimate and personal choices that are central to personal dignity and autonomy. Casey elaborated, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning in the universe, and of the mystery of human life. I mean, I said that earlier before I got to that, so, hey, who am I? I'm not on the court. Court did not claim that this broadly framed right is absolute. The court in Heller didn't even claim that the enumerated right to bear arms was an absolute right. So I don't know why he's bringing up that it's not absolute, because no right is absolute. You have the right to free speech. You don't have the right to slander or libel people. It's ridiculous. Yeah, no right is absolute. None whatsoever. Let's see, but a license to act on the basis of beliefs may correspond to one of many understandings of liberty, but certainly not ordered liberty. What? Ordered liberty sets limits and therefore defines the boundary between competing interests. Roe and Casey each struck a particular balance between the interests of someone who wants to obtain an abortion and the interest of what they termed potential life. But the people in various states may evaluate those interests differently. In some states, but it doesn't matter if the people in various states evaluate those interests differently, because we're supposed to have equal protection under the law because of the 14th Amendment. voters in other states may wish to impose tight restrictions based on their belief that an abortion destroys an unborn human being. Mississippi Code, our nation's historical understanding of ordered liberty does not prevent the people's elected representatives from deciding how abortion should be regulated. But it should, because, again, it's controlling an individual's actions. And when you're controlling an individual's actions, the state should have to prove that it has a compelling interest to do so. It should not just be able to say, oh, well, the state has the ability to vote how people can act in certain things. The argument that the state the state can decide how abortion can be regulated can also apply to sex. It can also apply to other things. So, again, I will say that the slippery slope argument is also a logical fallacy, but we have to be careful when we make rules such as this or rulings such as this, because basically it's saying, oh, well, states get to decide rights. States get to decide how much a person gets to act on a certain right. Let's see. Nor does the right to obtain abortion have a sound basis in precedent. Case relied on cases involving the right to marry a person of a different race, loving, marry while in prison, obtain contraceptives. Well, I think the right to obtain contraceptives in Griswold v. Connecticut is the most tightly coupled one here, because of the fact that, again, many people on the right who disagree with abortions also disagree with birth control pills and would probably want you to overturn Griswold v. Connecticut next. And the way this is worded, it looks like they could go after it if they really wanted to. But, and I would expect I'm going to expect another, once this comes down, and there's going to be a state that's like, we're banning birth control pills. And then they're going to then this court will go ahead and flip Griswold as well. And y'all will have reaped what you sown. And one of the problems here is that Republicans want to control other people. They don't want to control themselves. The Republican elected officials that support these things, and the Republican Supreme Court officials justices who make these rulings, this is about controlling other people's lives. Because I guarantee you, if one of these Republicans, if one of them got raped and needed to get an abortion, and a right to obtain an abortion after a rape was not allowed in their state, they would go to another state that allows it, or they would leave the nation and do it, because they're hypocrites. They don't want the laws to apply to them. And look, I've pointed out on my podcast, Democrats have done it as well. It's a matter of, mask mandates, for example, when the Governor Newsom went out and didn't wear a mask at dinner when he was supposed to, that was hypocritical. That was do as I say, not as I do. I guarantee you that if any one of these Republicans have a mistress at one of these wild sex parties that, what's-his-face was talking about, Mr., Madison Cawthorn was talking about how he was invited, I guess, to some sex parties. If one of those mistresses at one of those sex parties turns out pregnant, I guarantee you that those Republican politicians are going to go be paying for her to get an abortion. And if they can't get an abortion in a state where she lives, they're going to pay for her to go to another state where abortion is legal. And if Republicans get to ban abortion nationwide, guess what? They're going to fly that person to another country where abortion is illegal, or they're going to make sure it gets done all hush-hush and no one finds out. So this isn't about them. This is about everybody else. Let's see, the right in circumstances not to undergo involuntary surgery, forced administrative judge, blah, 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 blah. Respondents of the Solicitor General also rely on post-Casey decisions like Lawrence v. Texas, as I've brought up, and Obergefell v. Hodges, the right to marry a person of the same sex. These attempts to justify abortion through appeals of broader right to autonomy and defined one concept of existence prove too much. Why? Why did they prove too much? Those criteria at a high level of generality could license fundamental rights to illicit drug use, prostitution, and the like. I mean, why not? If the person who's doing it is consenting to it and is not hurting anybody else, then why should those be illegal as well? Prostitution, sex work is work. Guess what? The Trump marriage, do you think that's not prostitution? It's just long-term prostitution under the guise of a marriage contract. Do you think Melania really loves Donnie Boy? No. That's fine. They should have the right to be happy and do whatever it is they want to do. They want to enter into that agreement? That's fine. I don't care. Do it. Happy for them. But everybody else should be able to have consensual relationships with other people, including the ability to consent to sex for payment. So, Alita wants to say, oh, you can do these other things too. Good. People should have the right. You want to be able to smoke pot? Cool. You should be able to smoke pot. Now, should you be able to drive after you smoke a bunch of pot? No. And there are laws in the books that deal with that. Driving under the influence of a substance. It is illegal to do so. And that should continue to be illegal to do so. Doesn't mean you should be perfect. If I know that I'm going to stay in and, if I'm somebody who smokes weed and if I'm going to go smoke a joint, then guess what? The law shouldn't prevent me from doing so. The law should only prevent me from taking actions that put others at risk. Which, the whole mask mandate thing covers. But we're not going to get into all the mask mandate stuff. But, that's where I was waiting for somebody to say, well, if you believe in autonomy, why do I have to wear a mask? Well, you don't anymore, apparently. But, hey, you have to wear a mask during the pandemic because you put other people at risk. You do not have the right to put other people at risk, or you shouldn't have the right to put other people at risk. What sharply distinguishes the abortion right from the rights recognized in which the cases on which Roe and Casey rely is something that both these decisions acknowledge. Abortion destroys what those decisions call potential life, and what the law at issue is the greatest regards the life of a, quote, unborn human being. Abortion is inherently different. Abortion is a unique act. None of these other decisions cited by Roe and Casey involve the critical moral question posed by abortion. Therefore, they are inapposite. They do not support the right to obtain an abortion. By the same token, our conclusion is that the Constitution does not confer such right and does not undermine them in any way. What? Okay, so that seems like you turned that corner quite quickly there, pal. And drawing this critical distinction between abortion's right and other rights is not necessary to dispute Casey's claim that the specific practices of the state at the time of adoption does not mark the outer limits of the substantial sphere of liberty which the 14th Amendment protects. Abortion is nothing new. It has been addressed by lawmakers for centuries, and the fundamental moral question that it poses is ageless. The Bible, since we're citing things that are not having anything to do with the United States government, i.e., what they say in jolly old England and what they did in the 1300s, we can talk about that. Guess what? The Bible instructs you on how to have an abortion. If your wife cheats on you, and if you suspect your wife of cheating on you, you could give her this bitter water, and explains how to give her the bitter water. And if the bitter water causes her to have an abortion, guess what? She's a cheater by that right. So you basically instructed them how to have an abortion. So there you go. That's something in our history that many of y'all who are conservatives love to cite. The only thing that the Bible has about abortion is that how to perform one. And of course, Jewish law considers the embryo to be mere water and does not consider the fetus to be the same value as a human because of this clause in Exodus, where if you look at the Hebrew, not the retranslation of the Hebrew, but the Hebrew, it states, was it 23/24, 23 to 25, I think it is, if I'm remembering it correctly, two men strife, he hits the pregnant person, and no other problem happens. It's just an eye for or it's just monetary damages, or if there's a miscarriage, if the strike causes a miscarriage, it's monetary damage. But any other damage to the person who is pregnant, it's an eye for an eye, which means that attacking somebody who is pregnant under Jewish law, under the laws of Exodus, and only causing a miscarriage means you just have to pay a fine. Whereas if you killed the pregnant person, you get the death penalty. You get eye for an eye. So, Jolie, I think we all know religion is just ancient people's understanding of what essentially just interactions with aliens. That's unfortunate I don't have the Blog Talk Radio soundboard up here right now, because I'd have to play the the X-Files theme. Americans who believe that abortion should be restricted pressed countervailing arguments about modern developments. They note that attitudes about pregnancy of unmarried women have changed drastically, and that federal and state laws ban discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, that leave for pregnancy and childbirth are now guaranteed by law in many cases. They're still not treated equally. If you're pregnant, you still have restrictions. Safe haven laws, which allow women to drop off babies anonymously. Again, that doesn't say, just because they have safe haven laws doesn't mean that the person should be required to gestate for 9 months. You know, just safe haven laws say, okay, I don't want to be a parent, I'm going to drop off the baby instead of dropping the baby off in a dumpster. The safe haven laws doesn't justify forced gestation for 9 months. A woman who puts her newborn up for adoption today has little reason to fear that the baby will not find a suitable home. There are like millions of kids who are not adopted yet. What? I mean, he cites 46 or whatever. Centers for Disease Control adoption experience women and men demand for children to adopt women 18 to 44 years of age. Nearly 1 million women were seeking to adopt children in 2002. They were in demand for a child, whereas the domestic supply of infants relinquished at birth or within the first month of life available to be adopted had become virtually non-existent. Wonderful. Again, it is not the responsibility of a person to gestate just because another couple can't have a kid. This is a dangerous precedent here. This basically is saying that somebody who is pregnant should be forced to remain pregnant, or shouldn't mind that they're forced to remain pregnant because they'll eventually be somebody who will adopt the baby. You're not broodmares, people. They're people. It's not the responsibility of a person to remain pregnant for 9 months just so another couple can have a kid. It's not their fault that biology sucks for those wannabe parents. Those wannabe parents could adopt many of the people in foster care. No, but they want a baby. They don't want a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or somebody who might come up from a problem household. So therefore they have to be more inconvenienced, where if they only have a baby, then they can control what happens with the baby. Both sides make important policy arguments, but the supporters of Roe and Casey must show this court has the authority to weigh those arguments and decide how abortion may be regulated in the states. They have failed to make that showing, and thus we return the power to weigh these arguments to the people and their elected representatives. You should not have the power to weigh a right to the people. We next consider whether the doctrine of stare decisis. Here we go. Here he defends his being a hypocrite. Stare decisis plays an important role in our case law, and we have explained that it serves many valuable ends. It protects the interest of those who have taken action in reliance of past decisions. See Casey, Payne v. Tennessee, blah, blah, blah. Reduces incentives for challenging settled precedents, blah, blah, blah. Fosters even-handed decision-making by requiring that cases be decided in a like manner. We have long recognized, however, that stare decisis is not an inexorable command. It is weakest when we interpret the Constitution. It has been said that sometimes more important than an issue be settled more than it's settled right. But when it comes to interpretation of the Constitution, the great charter of our liberties, which is meant to endure through a long lapse of ages, we place the high value on having the matter settled right. In addition, one of our constitutional decisions goes astray, the country is usually stuck with a bad decision unless we correct our own mistake, and an erroneous constitutional decision can be fixed by amending the Constitution, but a Constitution is notoriously hard to amend. Therefore, it is in appropriate circumstances, we must be willing to reconsider and necessarily overrule constitutional decisions. Let me see if something is available. Let's hear. Let me Google how many times has Alito ignored stare decisis. Let's see. So during the 2006 term, Robertson and Alito repeatedly abandoned their principle. So this goes back all the way to 2006. In their Senate confirmation hearings, this is from the Chicago Law School, John Roberts and Samuel Alito cast themselves as first-rate lawyers, as masters of legal craftsmanship who committed the principle stare decisis. Alito testified to the Senate that the doctrine of stare decisis is a fundamental part of our legal system. The principle, he explained, limits the power of the judiciary, reflects the view that courts should respect the judgments of the wisdom that are embodied in prior judicial decisions. Stare decisis, he added, is not an inexorable command, but there must be strong resumption that the courts are going to follow prior precedents. It's hardly surprising that Roberts and Alito would pay such obedience to the doctrine of stare decisis in order to get themselves confirmed. Let's see. In Gonzalez versus Cahart, the court in a 5-4 decision upheld the constitutionality of federal law prohibiting so-called partial birth abortions, even though the court had virtually identical state law unconstitutional 7 years earlier. As Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg rightly observed in dissent, the majority, which includes Alito, offered no principal basis for ignoring the earlier decision. The only relevant change for Alito was for O'Connor. In the Federal Election Commission versus Wisconsin Right to Life, the same 5-justice majority held an unconstitutional provision of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act that limited political expenditures by corporations, even though the court had upheld the same provision only 4 years earlier. As Justice Davis Souter rightly observed in dissent, Justice Roberts' opinion held no principled basis for disregarding the earlier decisions. So apparently earlier on in his career, Justice Roberts did not uphold stare decisis as he has done so recently. But also Alito was one of those groups. In Hain versus Freedom from Religion Foundation, the same 5-justice majority, in an opinion by Justice Alito, held that individual taxpayers had no standing to challenge the constitutionality of the Bush administration's program of faith-based initiatives, even though the court held some 40 years ago that taxpayers do have standing to challenge federal expenditures on these grounds. These are only 3 examples of many that he could offer. Goodyear Tire, Lilly Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire, I think, was an example. In Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent of Goodyear Tire, of Lilly Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire, you had a situation where she pointed out that we did have ways to determine whether or not you were being paid a discriminatory wage based on when you noticed that you determined when the discriminatory wage was being paid, and not only based on the first time that wage was paid and then some subsequent times didn't reset the clock. Alito went against that previous ruling and ruled that Lilly Ledbetter had no case for discrimination because the clock for her had run out, despite the fact that Ginsburg correctly pointed that there was previous Supreme Court precedent that would have supported that. But again, Alito went against stare decisis. Let's see. Do I have this on my blog? I might have had this on my blog. Let me search my blog real quick. I don't. It must have been on my old blog. I don't have it on my old blog. Oh well. My old blog got nuked. Let's see. Old blog got nuked. So that is not there. But I had a thing about impeach Alito and why should we impeach Alito? Because of a ruling. Let's see, what do I have? Just impeach. Do I have anything on impeach? Probably mostly Trump stuff. No, I'm not seeing anything on that. But yeah, so there have been let's just look again. Justice Alito, stare decisis. This is another one. This is an article about how the Supreme Court is radically weakening stare decisis. And we could probably search that one for Alito. There's 50 mentions of Alito in this one. Let's see. Alito suggested it was permissible to overrule Abood because in recent years the court has been especially critical of its underpinnings. Thus, Alito explained that the public sector unions have been on notice for years regarding this court's misgivings about Abood. During this period of time, any public sector union seeking an agency fee provision as in a collective bargaining agreement must have understood that the constitutionality of such a provision was uncertain. Let's see. Casey plurality, this is another one. Justice Alito's 2009 majority opinion in Pearson versus Callahan. The court considered whether the two-step procedure to evaluate qualified immunity claims announced 8 years earlier in Saucer v. Katz would remain mandatory. Justice Alito acknowledged the need to consider stare decisis doctrine, but claimed that reversing precedent is particularly appropriate where a departure would not upset expectations the precedent considers of a judge-made rule that recently adopted to improve the operation of the courts, and experience has pointed up to the precedent's shortcomings. Alito would later confirm that, at least in constitutional cases, it is appropriate to overrule decisions that are, quote, badly reasoned. So the first part completely goes against what he ruled here in this case, but the second part, you know, that's consistent. But there's still that first part there. Let's see where else. Both Alito's allusion to experience that pointed to the precedent's shortcomings and his reiteration that badly reasoned decisions are subject to reversal show a willingness to use the substantive quality of a prior decision as a basis to overturn it, though at the time Alito did not claim that consideration of the substance prior to the opinion should be the primary reason to overrule a precedent. In Janus, Justice Alito Janus's opinion itself, the product of years-long effort to undermine the holding in Abood, reaffirmed that poor reasoning in a prior decision, Alito acknowledged that prior decisions of stare decisis listed several factors to consider when overruling a precedent. So Alito has basically spent his career bending over backwards trying to go over judicial precedent. So I can't really take anything seriously that Alito says. Yes, in Brown versus Board of Education, the court repudiated the separate but equal doctrine. Yes, I think we all agree that Brown... There might be some people, but a vast majority of people would agree that Brown versus the Board of Education overturning Plessy was a good example where let's Plessy versus Ferguson was a badly considered, badly reasoned ruling, and Brown versus the Board of Education rightly overturned it. The exception proves the rule. There are other examples of cases where the Supreme Court has rightly and justly overturned previous rulings. He says, on many other occasions, this court has overruled important constitutional decisions. We include a partial list in a footnote that follows. Without these decisions, blah, blah, blah. Where's the next line? American constitutional law, as we would know it, would be unrecognizable, and this would be a completely different country. Well, he doesn't say completely. Let's see, were we talking about original language sheen here? I forgot where I've been. I mean, what, for about stare decisis? No. If you're talking about the stare decisis thing, Wes, stare decisis is about whether or not the Supreme Court should be constrained to previous rulings. And clearly, not in every case, clearly Brown versus the Board of Education, fine. I have no problem. Again, most people have no problems with that. But it should take a massive consideration. But problem is that Alito has been making a career of not following stare decisis. Let's see, Alito authored Harris versus Quinn, in which he suggested in dicta that Abood was incorrectly decided because the First Amendment should prohibit fair share fees in public sector unions. Alito has, I guess, it's very important to Alito to ignore stare decisis when it comes to unions as well as body autonomy. There's a lot about here in Abood and Janus. I'm trying to get to other opinions that might have had when it comes to that. In Ramos's three-justice dissent made an argument in defense of the precedent of stare decisis terms. The dissent, an unexpected alignment of justices Alito, Roberts, and Kagan, argued that Apodaca was not nearly as poorly reasoned as the majority would have it, but it was silent on whether or not such poor reasoning should be written to overrule in his case. The sense of apparent acceptance of poor reasoning as the first factor in stare decisis analysis was especially alarming, given Kagan's vigorous opposition to the factor a year in Nick. So, I don't know what Nick was. I don't know what that is. But again, you could Google a lot of this yourself if you wish to. I'm not going to go over much of it more. But the Alito has lied on under oath. I would say at this point, I don't like to throw on lie a lot, but he told a falsehood under oath that he respected stare decisis. He clearly does not, and in this case is Just another one of the extreme examples, because Roe v. Wade was a solid rule of the land. It's been in effect since the 70s, and now it's kaput, or it will be kaput if this draft becomes official. And again, I currently see no reason to believe that draft is not going to be official because of what we went over earlier, where basically it said the draft is here just to go over, perhaps catch any typos or whatever, or any factual inconsistencies, like if you maybe got a case wrong or something. The nature of the court's error can apparently play. The infamous decision in Plessy versus Ferguson was one such. Yes, we all know Plessy versus Ferguson sucked. But Roe is not on the level of Plessy versus Ferguson. I don't care what he says about that. Wielding nothing but raw judicial power, the court usurped power to address a question of profound moral and societal importance that the Constitution unequivocally is for the people. No, that's just bafflingly wrong, because the court did not usurp a power. The court has the power to protect individual rights and from states from trampling over those individual rights. If an individual has a right, the state doesn't have the authority to trample over it. The right is a fundamental right. It doesn't have to be enumerated to be a fundamental right, but if it's a right, the states do not have the power to trample over it, or should have to prove why they have the authority to restrict it in any way. And again, it should be up to the state to prove that, but Alito doesn't believe that. As we read early in the reading, Alito states that it should be not up to the state to prove why it has the authority to prevent actions, but up to the individual to prove why they should have the right. And that thinking is backwards, in my opinion. Absolutely backwards. See, where did the time go? I think I already saw Seth Meyers, but I missed Stephen Colbert. You should be listening to watching the Liberal Dan Radio. This is a special episode of Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, That's Right. So, I mean, you could always watch the replay of Stephen Colbert or Seth Meyers. Hello, is it too late for Biden to codify Roe? Let's see. Let's tackle that point. You could not. I mean, codifying Roe would basically say it would be difficult to specifically codify Roe, but you could codify the protections that are in Roe, I would say. Or you could codify the protections in Casey. Or what I would do specifically, Brandy, and thank you for contributing to chat, I appreciate it. Please remember to like and subscribe. Is that if whoever would draft a law to codify reproductive rights in this country and to make it the rule of the land, and you have until hopefully you have more than just till the end of this current term. Hopefully the Democrats can maintain their majorities. But if you want to get it done, and I don't know if you're going to get it done with only having 50 because of Manchin, and I don't know if Manchin's going to go along with it. That's the important thing here, in the question of whether or not we could protect reproductive rights on a federal level, is whether or not we can get Manchin to come aboard. Excuse me. Unreliable cinema would probably be reliable in this case, because I believe Kristen Sinema is firmly on the side of pro-choice. Manchin, I don't know why he's a Democrat. I mean, I guess I'm happy that he is, because that's why we control the Senate, but I don't know why Manchin is a registered Democrat. I can find nothing in his platform, unless his stated platform is just a complete set of bull, and he just supports what he can to, as a Democrat, but then tells his constituents, oh, well, I'm not really supporting this, whatever. But I think what you would have to do, and maybe it would be very important. Let's see, Wes, what do I do for a living? I'm a software developer. I don't think we're cousins, but I don't know. We could be. My mom was adopted, so it's quite possible that I have some cousins out there that I don't know about. We've recently found some from Ancestry. And also, do you play the drums very well? Not very well. I could probably fake something, but probably not. I'd be better as your front man, I think. I think if you were going to have a band, I think we should have that. Yes, Brandy, abortion will never be ended anywhere, ever. Or ever, anywhere. People will always continue to have an abortion, because that's the thing. That's one of the things about abortion and the right wing's obsession with punishing people who get abortions, is that if you really were pro-life, and if you really wanted to reduce abortions towards your ideal of zero, you would support liberals and not conservatives. Why do I say this? I've discussed this on the show before. I think I discussed this with Hal Sparks last week, maybe. But if I didn't, we're going to just rediscuss it again. In Florida, when Jeb Bush was governor, he decided to defund Planned Parenthood. In defunding Planned Parenthood, several Planned Parenthoods that were the only clinics in the counties had to shut down because they were punishing Planned Parenthood for the fact that it performs abortions by not allowing it to do its other services, like prenatal care. So people were denied the ability to get prenatal care. People were denied the ability to get care that would help them prevent unwanted pregnancies in the first place. So during the rest of the tenure of Jeb Bush and his governorship of Florida, the abortion rate went up. So you had more abortions in Florida after they defunded Planned Parenthood than before. On the other side of the coin, the other side of the argument or whatever, Hickenlooper, governor of Colorado at the time, they expanded contraceptive access to allow anybody to get oral contraceptive pills or to get the IUD or what have you. And it didn't matter if you were insured or not, because the Affordable Care Act did require that oral contraception be considered as covered as first dollar coverage. So you didn't have to pay any of your deductible in order to get birth control pills because it was considered preventive care. Unfortunately, some plans, because of the Hobby Lobby ruling, were not required to cover oral contraception coverage, and as such, if you didn't have the coverage, then you couldn't get it. So Colorado, what they did is they just made contraception coverage either via an IUD or oral contraception universally available at no cost to people who might need them. And what happened? Unwanted pregnancies dropped. So you want to reduce the number of abortions that take place, you want to reduce the abortion rates that take place, enact liberal policies that give people policy over their own bodies. And don't try and just punish people because they want to have body autonomy or they don't want to have to gestate for 9 months because something happened. Whatever that something might be. Many times I'll bring up rape because rape should be considered a legitimate reason to not want to marry, because often the conservatives will say, well, if you don't want to be pregnant, then don't have sex. Well, guess what? If you're raped, you don't have a choice in the matter. You're having the sex because you're getting raped. So, but rape is just so few. Well, it doesn't matter to me because I support abortion 100% without exception. So there's that. But I'll point out, if you don't have a choice in the matter, then you should be late. And a lot of these laws do not contain rape exceptions. So there's that. So, but what I would do, Brandy, Wes Webb, Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A suck. Yes, another thing we agree on, Wes. Thank you very much. Hide the shadows. I'm usually, what program language do I program in? VB.net. I've done some C#. I've done some ASP.net. I've done some, class VBA and like Excel or whatever. I learned initially on Fortran and on C. But I've done some other stuff as well. My current position, I'm doing much less programming and doing some more other stuff. I'm not going to get into all that, but I've had a wide variety of stuff. Let's see. Brandy Rose. Why is Wes Webb here? Hey, don't tell Wes Webb to leave. I need more viewers, more subscribers, more likes. So, Alan Drifter, remind me later to tell you how about I got banned from Hobby Lobby. I may have heard this. I don't know already, but why don't you tell in the chat if you feel up to it? I'm more than happy to have you tell it in the chat so we can all get a good chuckle from it. But if you're not comfortable telling it publicly, and if you would rather tell it in the Voltron chat, by all means, just do it there too. I can't wait to hear it. If I'm right, I can't hear. The power of craft compels you. Let's see, West Web. Hope you have some other way of making money. Yeah, I do. I have my regular full-time position does pay me a decent wage, and I'm very happy where I'm working. So this is a side job, I guess. I'm not quite at the point of how Sparks where I have, people can sub and people can, pay me money during the chats and cheer me on, but I'm hoping to eventually get there. And I appreciate everybody who's a sparkler, everybody who watches Hal Sparks' stuff, who's come on to my stuff and started to watch my stuff as well. I am happy that y'all did so. I appreciate it a lot. Clearly, I'm not at the levels of a Hal or anybody bigger ones, but I'm trying to get there. At those craft crucifixes that they come to complete yourself a ground one started walking around yelling, "The power of craft compels you." I can imagine how they would be quite perturbed at that and wouldn't be happy about it. So again, we're back to the ruling. Well, back to what I guess Brandy's point initially was, which is that I would, instead of, quote, codifying Roe, what I would do is, if I was a Democratic legislator at this point, I would look at how he has worded this. How Alito has worded this ruling. And I would just start writing a law that does an end around this ruling, tackle all of the issues that pertains with that, and basically say, whereas the 14th Amendment empowers the federal government to protect individual liberty, and then state where all this stuff is, and then enforce that under the state why it is equal protection under the law, state why, clearly why this is an example of individual liberty, state that the Ninth Amendment, protects rights, go against the statements that he's made here and deal with them in the law of the text, so that it would be harder for the Constitution or for the Supreme Court to then come around and then knock that out. But it's going to be difficult to do because, if you make a law, this is an activist conservative court. Because this is an activist conservative court, and if you pass a law that protects reproductive rights in this country, by doing so, you are, even if you manage to word it as you should be able to do so under the 14th Amendment, under the 9th Amendment, if you're able to do so, that's not going to stop these 5 justices from coming around and just saying, nope, sorry, we're going to throw this one out too. So what needs to happen is either we need to expand the court, or we need to find some other way to legally gain the majority on the court. And I'm going to say legally, because that's all I'm going to say, is that any replacement on the court that should be done legally. I question the legality of how Trump got Kennedy to leave. That's some sus, as the kids would say. I don't trust that at all. Brandon, I appreciate that you're here because Hal pointed you here. I thank you very much for coming. Hal has recognized an area of anger on the left and is filling a channel for people to release their frustration with all the BS that's going on up there. And me and Hal agree on a lot of things. And I've been trying to watch and listen to Hal more, specifically so that I don't duplicate his efforts. Like, I don't want to be there doing what Hal's doing, because why would I do that when he already does it fine? He does a great job what he does, so I need to do what I feel that I do fine. And to me, Hal has some great, historical knowledge. I think that kind of what I bring to the table here is that I know a lot of the constitutional ruling stuff. I was able to, if you've listened the entire time, I could bring up, a lot of the previous rulings and how these things, I've watched the Supreme Court a lot. So I think that bringing that's the table, and pointing out the hypocrisy in his ruling, I think, is something that maybe I bring to the table that kind of maybe Hal doesn't do. I don't know. Maybe he has done it. I just haven't seen it yet because I can't watch him all the time because I have to work. But sometimes I'll leave him on in the background, obviously, but I want to support him as much as I can because he's being supportive of me, which is awesome of his part. Let's see. Court's landmark decision in West Hotel illustrates the court's previously overruled decisions. Stare decisis again. I'm kind of skipping over, I think, the remainder of the stare decisis ruling because I just don't think that Alito has any moral authority to say that stare decisis, to make any arguments on stare decisis. He said he would respect it. He has not. That was the lie detector test determined that was a falsehood, at least, if not a lie. See, not only this, he's repeating himself again. He repeats himself a lot in this. Roe's failure to even note the overwhelming consensus of state laws in effect to strike. Well, again, why should Roe have to note the overwhelming consensus of state laws in 1868? Because the laws in 1861, laws in 1850, whatever, allowed us to treat black people as property in this country. So perhaps the laws in 1868 are irrelevant to the laws in 1972 or 2022. Right? Maybe? Let's see. Talking more about history, because, Alito just wants us to look at the history. Or part of it is that Alito wants us to look at the history. Remain as a handful of cases having something to do with marriage, Loving versus Virginia, Griswold versus Connecticut, the right of married persons to contain contraceptives. Though Griswold versus Connecticut is not about marriage, it's about contraceptives. Maybe it's about the right of married persons to obtain contraceptives, but ultimately it's about contraceptives. It's not about marriage. And I like that he calls it a scheme. But him calling a scheme, he's muddying the water. He's poisoning the well, if you will. The scheme Roe produced looked like legislation, and the court provided the sort of explanation that might be expected from a legislative body. So maybe if a legislative body were to come up with similar things, maybe Alito wouldn't have as much of a leg to stand on. However, I think Alito at that point would then find other legs to stand on in order to deny people reproductive rights and body autonomy. Something that has been lacking on the left far too long and allowing the right to eat the lunch of those on the left. Marketing recognize a niche and will fill what Hal has been doing. And that's good. It's good that what Hal's doing. And again, one of the reasons I like to continue to have Hal on is that we agree on a lot of stuff. We both apparently we both agree about something about Lee Camp too, because when he brought up Lee Camp on his show, I think today, and I was like, ugh, Lee Camp, and he was like, Liberal Dan, exactly. Let's see, what Roe did not provide was any cogent justification for the lines it drew. I mean, just because Alito doesn't find it to be a cogent justification doesn't mean that it's not a cogent justification. Just state that. I mean, that's his opinion of it, and I guess the 5 opinions are more better than the 4 opinions. So 5 versus 4 is going to overturn this. Even more glaring deficiency was Roe's failure to justify the critical distinction between pre- and post-viability abortions, because I guess they were taking into consideration the weighing of the controversy, and that perhaps some would feel that if you didn't rule on the viable ones, then maybe it's somehow better. I mean, that seems to be a reasonable argument, even though my stance is that abortion allowed 100%, no exceptions. This arbitrary line is not found much to support, but you're supporting or you're upholding a law that has an arbitrary line. You're allowing the state to make an arbitrary line, and the state shouldn't get to make arbitrary lines. I mean, I guess you allow the state to make arbitrary lines when it comes to drawing of congressional districts too, but that's another issue. Viability also, there's more talk about viability. I mean, again, viability is meant to mark a line having universal moral significance. Can it be that a fetus that is viable in a big city in the United States has a privileged moral status not enjoyed by an identical fetus in a remote area of a poor country? I mean, why are we worrying about remote areas of poor countries? Our constitutional laws that would protect abortions in America don't deal with abortions in remote areas of poor countries. Poor countries are irrelevant to the discussion of whether or not a Supreme Court ruling is justified or not. Much like how it's not irrelevant that what they decided over there in jolly old England in the 13th century or the 16th century or the 17th century. In addition, the court once explained viability is not a hard and fast line, blah, blah, blah. All in all, opinion of the court still, page 50 now. All in all, Roe's reasoning was exceedingly weak, according to him. Blah, blah, blah. Of course, Roe's, whatever, more about Roe's being weakness. Casey visited Roe 20 years later. Very little of Roe reasoning was defended or preserved, blah, blah, blah. So now we're back to Casey. So basically he uses that Casey overturned some of Roe to overturn Roe, but that's not an excuse to overturn Casey. Workability. Our Precedents Council, that another important decision is making whether a precedent should be overruled, is whether or not the rule imposes is workable. That is, whether it can be understood or applied in a consistent or predictable manner. Seems to be predictable. People have the right to obtain an abortion. You know, if you're pregnant, there you go. As Justice Scalia noted in his Casey dissent, determining whether a burden is due or undue is inherently standardless. Okay, so then hint on or lean on, err on the side of individual rights. How about that? And I think that the undue burden, I mean, yeah, the undue burden might be a weak thing because it's not clearly defined, but I mean, there are other, not so, like when in Heller versus, DC versus Heller, it was ruled, that by Scalia that the court had that municipalities did have the authority to make some gun regulations, that the right to own a weapon or own a gun is not absolute, but didn't carve out what those exceptions were. That was left to be vague, but apparently that's okay, because it's a Scalia opinion, and Alito is Scalia-lite, because Alito is all of Scalia's horribleness with none of his brains. Difficulty of applying Casey's new rule surfaced that very case. Controlling opinion found that Pennsylvania's 24-hour waiting period requirement and its informed consent provision did not impose undue burdens, but Justice Stevens, applying the same test, reached the opposite result. That did not bode well. Then Chief Justice Rehnquist aptly observed the undue burden standard presents nothing more than a workable trimester framework. Okay. The ambiguity of undue burden test has also produced disagreements in later cases. Whole Women's Health versus Hallerstad. The court adopted the cost-benefit interpretation, blah, blah, blah. Undue burden would be like, to me, did the person who was seeking an abortion have the ability to obtain an abortion with enough time after finding out that they were pregnant? Yes or no? No, then it's an undue burden. Yes, it's not an undue burden. That's how I would. That's how I would very simplistically look at that rule. Even though personally, I would say no abortions banned, no exceptions, as opposed to conservatives would say no abortions, no exceptions. Let's see. Many people watching where you have your audience get up and in their window and yell out, "I am mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore." Then they come back and post, "Done it." Maybe you can start a unique trait that stands out among the rest. How about you have a 30-second cutout after a certain amount of time? And so many people watching when you have the audience get up and shout out the window, "I'm mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore." Then they come back and post on it. Oh, okay. That'd be funny. But hey, I did make a shorter version or at least a smaller version of this that is a YouTube video. So you don't necessarily have to shout out at your window, but you can share the video a lot of the places if you wish. Experience with the court's appeals provide further evidence that Casey's line would be permissible and unconstitutional restrictions, blah, blah, blah. Casey has been generated a long list of conflicts, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, we get it. You don't like Casey, and basically next few pages are going to be criticizing undue burden. Let's see. I love when they use dissents as part of their reasoning. Like, it's a dissent. It's not a justification. It's he's using the losing side from Gorsuch to explain reasoning about whole women's health. I think that was the first Texas case. Courts cases, abortion cases have diluted the strict standard for facial constitutional challenge. They've ignored the court's third-party standing doctrine. They have disregarded standard principles. They have flouted the ordinary rules of severability, blah, blah, blah. They've distorted first... Okay, whatever. We last consider whether overruling Roe and Casey will upend substantial reliance interests. Traditional reliance interests raised when advanced planning of great precision is most obviously a necessity. In Casey, the controlling opinion conceded that traditional reliance interests were not implicated because getting an abortion is generally an unplanned activity and reproductive planning. Well, clearly, because usually when you get an abortion, it's an unplanned pregnancy, or the pregnancy is planned and the medical reasoning for needing to terminate the pregnancy is unplanned. So most abortions are not planned for one reason or the other. Duh. I mean, hello. Sky is blue, water is wet. Come on, Alito. Again, Alito wanted to be like Scalia, just not as smart. Casey perceived a more intangible form of reliance and wrote that people had organized intimate relationships and that people made choices that defined their views of themselves, their place in society. Again, he was repeating himself again. Our decision returns the issue of abortion to those legislative bodies and allows women on both sides of the abortion issue to seek to affect the legislative process. It doesn't just allow women; it allows everybody, including people who are no longer, who are never going to be faced or are no longer faced with the potential of having an abortion. All these people getting to decide whether or not an individual who could get pregnant does have body autonomy or not. Women are not without electoral political power, but you shouldn't have to have electoral political power to defend a right. So we're talking about a right, and you shouldn't have to defend your right by voting. You shouldn't be able to lose a right because of voting. Rights should be non-negotiable. It's a right, you get to keep it. Period. Let's see what else. Unable to show concrete reliance on Roe and Casey themselves, Solicitor General suggests that overruling those decisions would threaten the court's precedents, holding that the Due Process Clause protects other rights. And they're true. He says this is not correct for reasons that have already been discussed, of course, but here you go. He's not going to discuss something finally. He's going to leave something as only discussed once. But clearly, Griswold versus Connecticut is a threat here. Griswold versus Connecticut, of all the ones listed, Obergefell, Lawrence, Griswold are all at risk. I'd argue that every one is at risk, but Griswold versus Connecticut is the one that's most at risk. Why? Because Griswold, Connecticut is more tightly coupled to the abortion argument, as I've said. Because according to some people, birth control pills are abortifacients. There's no moral difference between a birth control pill and an abortion. Therefore, they should be able to ban those too. And then we're going to come back, and then Alito's going to make the same ruling saying, oh, there's people who disagree on whether or not abortion or birth control pills should be allowed or not. So therefore, we're going to rule whether or not it's going to be allowed or not. And then we're going to allow states to decide and people to make this decision. And then we're going to deny people more restrictions, or we're going to deny people access to health care, especially those who can get pregnant. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast down on precedents that do not concern abortion. But again, Griswold, to some people, is related enough to abortion where it's a threat. But the arguments that you're making that, for years gay marriage was illegal. There was no inherent right to gay marriage that was held by any of the states until very recently. By your arguments, Alito, it should be something that's left to the states. Let the democracies decide. Let these experiments in democracy make their own rules. No. There has to be a line where you draw, that you say, okay, these certain things are individual actions, and you draw that line, and the states should not have the power to prevent them unless those individual actions have negative effects on anybody else. I mean, like if somebody's attacking you, you get to prevent them from attacking you. Like you can self-defense of I guess the right to bear arms, the right to self-defense. If somebody's attacking you and you're armed and you're legitimately threatened, your life is legitimately being threatened by the person, you have the right to shoot them in self-defense, right? So I guess that other person gets harmed, but other person is harmed because you're protecting yourself because you don't want to have your body harmed by that other person. Same thing with abortion. While even though it's not a purposeful act by the fetus or the embryo, it's still an individual getting to determine whether or not they are having control over their own body. So I can't believe that we're still talking about abortion. I can't believe it either. I can't believe that we're having this discussion. It's 2022, and we're about to see the right to have an abortion get trampled by an activist conservative court. And how long have I been talking now? How long is this 2 hours and 30 minutes? I wasn't expecting this to be 2 hours and 30 minutes, but hey, I can talk for a while. So it's a secret 3-hour show, an unplanned 3-hour show. The analysis starts out with the right of foot, but automatically, Casey Pirelli was certainly right that it is important for the public to perceive our decisions based on principle. We cannot exceed the scope of our authority under the Constitution, cannot allow our decisions. Okay, whatever. Yeah, you believe that it was an activist court, while being an activist court, hypocrite. As Hamilton famously put it, no, actually that was Burr that said, talk less, smile more. The Constitution gives the judiciary neither force nor will. The Federalist numbers. Again, here we go again with, we need to be strict constructionalists. We have to be textualist when we're looking at the Constitution. Here's something from the Federalist Papers. It's conservative hypocrisy at its finest. We're going to be textualists, except for the Federalist Papers. If you get to look at the Federalist Papers, you're not a textualist. Sorry, you fail that. Our sole authority is to exercise judgment, which is to say the authority to judge what the law means and how it should apply in the case at hand. Court has... are you going back to like Marbury versus Madison at this point? The judge has no authority to decree that erroneous precedent is permanently exempt from evaluation. You could... If something is really bad, like Plessy, you get to overturn it. But no. Neither decision has had a debate over the issue of the constitutional right to obtain an abortion. Indeed, this case, 26 expressly asks us to overrule Roe v. Casey and return the issue of abortion to the people and their elected representatives. Again, you shouldn't have to do so. You shouldn't get to do so. The court's inability to end debate on the issue should not have been surprising. The court cannot bring about the permanent resolution of a rancorous national controversy simply by dictating a settlement and telling the people to move on. Well, I mean, if in the case of something being a right, yes, people should move on. You don't like this right that people have, don't use it. Very simple. Whatever influence the court may have on a public attitudes must stem from the strength of our opinions, not attempt to exercise, quote, raw judicial power. We do not pretend to know how our political system decided to respond to today's decision. Oh, I think we know how it's going to react. We're going to have a lot of angry people, and justifiably so. And the only thing that I'm going to say about this is that the only positive that can come out of this is the fact that, guess what? All those people who might not have come out in 2022 are now going to come out. All those people who thought that Roe v. Wade was safe, yeah, they're going to come out now. And they're going to fight you. And they're going to fight conservatism. And maybe we'll now see a blue wave. Maybe. Or maybe not, because, Democrats like to shoot themselves in the foot. But it's a possibility that out of this will come a rising tide of pissed off people who decided that they're mad as hell and they're not going to take anymore. Thank you, hide in the shadows. We therefore hold that the Constitution does not confer the right to abortion. Roe v. Casey must be overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and their elected representatives. So, I guess the people elected representatives could be Congress if the Democratic Party was to do that. But if the Democratic Party needs to try and do this, even if Manchin stops them from doing so, because the Democratic Party needs to the voters need to understand that it's conservatives, of which Manchin is a part, that are preventing things from happening, including codification of Roe and including many other things like, needed economic development, Build Back Better plan, etc. We must now decide what standard will govern the state abortion regulations undergo constitutional challenge and whether the law before us satisfies the appropriate standard. Under our precedents, rational basis of review is an appropriate standard for such challenges. As we've explained, procuring an abortion is not a fundamental constitutional right, because the right has no such basis in Constitution, text, nation history. Again, let us go back to Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights should not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, so therefore it being not in the Constitution is irrelevant. I don't know how anybody could be on the Supreme Court and not understand this. Nation's history. For a long time, we didn't have freedom in our nation's history. We didn't have women's suffrage in the nation's history. We didn't have Jewish suffrage in the nation's history for a while. I mean, I think Maryland was an early state to do that, but not every state allowed Jews to vote. Black people couldn't vote, and then when black people started to vote, they started doing other things to prevent black people from voting, and they still do certain things to prevent black people to vote, including the so-called voter ID laws, which contain provisions that have nothing to do with the requirement of an ID, but are instead placed in there to make it harder for people to vote, especially people of color. Now, of course, when a conservative is listening to that statement, they'll always respond back and say, what's racist about requiring an ID? I'm not saying that it's racist to require an ID. I'm saying that all the other provisions in those laws, like SB 202 in Georgia, that, bans people from handing out water in long lines, or in lines in general, for people waiting in line to vote. But then when you have like the white districts, you don't have lines, and in the black districts, you do have lines. It makes it much more uncomfortable for black people to vote. So you're making it harder for them to vote. So you're making it much more likely that they decide to walk off because they're tired of standing in line. And now you've made it so that they can't get a water unless the person giving them the water wants to commit a crime in doing so. But, so we have a history of being a terrible nation. Our nation's history is full of terribleness. We should not look back at our nation's history to justify current law. So Alito then follows, it follows that states may regulate abortion for legitimate reasons, and such regulations are challenged by the Constitution. Courts cannot substitute their social and economic beliefs for the judgment of legislative bodies. But the judgment of legislative bodies do not have the power to overturn rights. They can no more overturn enumerated rights than non-enumerated rights. A law regulating abortion, like other health and welfare laws, is entitled to strong presumption of validity. Why? I don't know why it's entitled to a strong presumption of validity. I don't know why it's citing Heller as a strong presumption of viability. Heller, again, it has to do with gun rights, not abortion. It must be sustained if there is a rational basis in which the legislator could have thought it would have served a legitimate state interest. What is a legitimate state interest? I mean, that's a legitimate state interest is just as vague as an undue burden. But you're okay with legitimate state interest, Alito, but you're not okay with undue burden. That's, again, more hypocrisy from your part. You're making me change this week's Hypocrite of the Week. I already had somebody in line who was going to be Hypocrite of the Week, and you're making me want to make you the Hypocrite of the Week. And you're probably gonna win this out because it was going to be somebody else, but now I'm thinking it's finna be you. Five-year-old girl was raped frequently by family members. She became the youngest child to have a baby. That's why abortion should be legal. Yes, that is one of many reasons that abortion should be legal. I will make the rape exception and the, incest exception argument at times, because sometimes people need that hit in the face of these people had no choice in the matter. They are victims. You should not continuously victimize them by forcing them to gestate and relive the pain over and over. They're going to relive the pain enough. Don't make them give birth. But My stance on it is always going to be body autonomy. That it should be between the person who's pregnant and their doctors to decide what is to be done. And this is that. It's not the state's business to step in and interfere with that. Now, earlier, when you're dealing with the pre-viability area, and then, when the fetus can't survive outside the womb, then the fetus can't exist outside the womb. There should be no argument of that. But in the cases where it's after viability, guess what? Again, nobody is seeking those late-term abortions because they're like, well, I changed my mind. I'm just going to go get an abortion now. I really don't feel like it. I thought I could, but I'm not. No, nobody's going to do that. That doesn't happen. That's a myth by conservatives to villainize people who seek abortions. The people who get late-term abortions, of which, some of the earliest late-term abortions might fall in there, but usually, but may fall pre-viability. But here's the deal. Most of the people who are getting abortions after, quote, viability either are doing so because there's a health reason to do so, like they might die during childbirth or they might die during a cesarean section. They can't handle, maybe they have preeclampsia or some other condition that would make gestational term a non-starter and would put themselves at risk. And what if they have, and their other loved ones, regardless of if they have kids or not, should have to, even if they had no loved ones, even if they lived alone with their cats, or even didn't have any cats, just lived alone by themselves and had a health risk, they should not be able to be forced to take on death or permanent injury because the pregnancy has now become dangerous to the person. Or maybe the case is the fetus is not going to be viable after born. Like there are conditions that are known where as soon as the delivery happens, the fetus is going to die. Or the fetus is already going to be dead, and some of these laws would require a stillbirth of a dead fetus at 9 months, forcing the person to gestate longer than needed to, just because they feel that it's the moral thing to do. No, it's absolutely amoral to require somebody to gestate or to remain pregnant, quote, with a dead or soon to be dead fetus inside of their body. So that's the only times that people are going to be getting abortions in the third trimester, are the people where there's a significant risk of death of the fetus, or there's a significant risk of death or health to the person who is pregnant, and as such, it should be none of the government's business to step in and prevent them from doing so. There should be no obstacles blocking the way of somebody from saving their own life, or there should be no obstacles in preventing somebody from eliminating a pregnancy that is going to be drastically dreadful. I mean, somebody who's already knows if it's a wanted pregnancy and they're looking forward to giving birth, but yet something happens and the fetus is not viable and won't survive outside the womb, it is absolutely cruel to force that person to remain pregnant longer than they want to be. It's cruel. It's cruelty. But they don't care about cruelty. All they care is about the babies. That's what somebody said to me one time when I ran for office. All I care about is the babies. No. You care about other people's babies. Most of these people, especially these backwoods Louisiana parts, I'm living in New Orleans. It's not the backwoods. We're a liberal, progressive city in a state of red. But you go to those backwoods areas, you go to the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain, you go even further north of the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain, you get into some areas. I guarantee you, if their daughter came home knocked up from a black kid, I guarantee you that racism would win out over their pro-lifeness. I guarantee you that. Absolutely. Let's see. 16-year-old female cell child. Yes, absolutely. 1/3 of all little girls are molested. Hide in shadows, man after my own heart. I would not say that 1/3 is usually number that sticks in the minds of women. Let's see. Yes, a lot of people are abused. A lot of people, there are lots of reasons that we could justify, where we can justify abortions. I just tend to choose a more simpler one typically. But I will go into more detail when need to be to point out the cruelty of these laws and how these laws victimize women, children, other folks who can be pregnant, folks who are non-binary, trans folk, etc. Legitimate interest justify Mississippi's Gestational Age Act, except in a medical emergency or, in this case, a severe fatal abnormality, which, of course, again, what defines a severe fatal abnormality? Is that a vague term that he doesn't like, except for when he does? Again, more hypocrisy on Alito's part. Mississippi legislative findings recount stages of human pain, blah, 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 even though they were hypocritical and they were contradictory to each other. He's opposed to the so-called barbaric dilation and evacuation. It's not barbaric because you're not, there's nothing barbaric about it because it's not a fully developed human. We end up speaking where we began. Abortion presents a profound moral question. The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens from each state and from regulating or prohibiting abortion. It does, but you just want to ignore the 9th Amendment. Roe v. Casey arrogated that authority. We now overrule those decisions and return the authority to people and elected representatives. The judgment of the Fifth Circuit is reversed and the case is remanded for further proceedings consistent with this opinion. It is so ordered. And then let's see. So we got to page 68. Appendix A. This appendix contains statutes criminalizing abortion in all stages of pregnancy in the states existing in 1868. Again, who cares about what the people in 1868 thought about rights? Because the people in 1868, many of them didn't understand rights. They felt that they needed to that black people were not people, that they were going to prevent black people from voting. Jim Crow laws, segregation, all sorts of terrible stuff that took place in our nation's history post-Civil War. And yet we're going to look at 1868 and what these laws say. Some of these states were just readmitted back into the Union in 1868. Wonder if Virginia, I don't think you should get the state of Virginia law in 1848 since Virginia seceded. Their laws should no longer be a count. So let's look at the Virginia law. Any free person who shall administer to any pregnant woman any medicine, drug, or substance, whatever, or use and employ any instrument or other means which intent thereby to destroy a child with which such woman may be pregnant, or to produce abortion or miscarriage, and shall therefore destroy such child or produce such abortion or miscarriage, unless the same shall have been done to preserve the life of such woman, shall be punished. If the death of a quick child there be produced by confinement in the penitentiary, not less than more than 1 or 5 years, or the death of the child not quick, thereby produced by confinement in jail, but not less. Anyway. So there you go. That was Virginia's archaic law way back when. California, 1850. Louisiana, 1856. Again, before they seceded from the Union. So maybe those laws should get to reset after they were re-entered back into the Union. Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania now, I think, has pro-choice laws. Let's see, Oregon. I'm sure Oregon has pro-choice laws now, so what does it matter? Maryland is a pro-choice state, but in 1868, it enacted a law. Maybe Maryland enacted the law in 1868, so maybe that's why he arbitrarily chose 1868, so he could include Maryland. The Maryland law is long. Holy crap. Jeez. Maryland law is ridiculously long. Florida, 1868. Again, he probably chose 1868 because he could get less. Oh, wait. Or it was 1886. Maybe it was 1886 that he chose. I don't know. Because now he's in Minnesota, 1873. Arkansas, 1875. Georgia, North Carolina. All the traitor states that were just let back into the Union. Tennessee, South Carolina. Kentucky, 1910. So we're still going over laws that were the laws of states that were existing. Oh, fine, Appendix B. Appendix B states statutes criminalize abortion at all stages and territories that became states in the District of Columbia. So Hawaii, Washington, Colorado. Again, I guess this is when they were territories and not states. I don't know. Why is that important in us taking a look at whether or not it should be legal now or not, or whether or not this is a right now. Again, this country has a very long history of not understanding rights or not protecting rights. So that's basically it. We don't have dissents here yet. So we're not going to get to see what, Kagan, Sotomayor, maybe Roberts has to say. I don't know if there'll be separate dissents, if Roberts will have one dissent, and if maybe the liberal justices might have another dissent, or maybe they'll all have the same dissent. I don't know. Again, I think the ruling is probably going to be 5-4. I think Roberts will, even though Roberts does have some history of opposing stare decisis, he has more recently supported stare decisis when it comes to issues of abortion. Again, when he voted for the first Texas law that required admitting privileges on behalf of doctors who perform abortions. That rule, at that time, you still had the 5-4 pro-choice majority. They overturned the Texas law, and then when it came back around to test the Louisiana law that was identical to the Texas law a year later, or maybe 2 years later, however later it was, Roberts, who had sided with that law being a constitutional law, then sided against the law because he was supporting stare decisis. So I think in this case, because this case is so squashy, because this ruling squashes Roe and Casey, I don't think you're going to see Roberts supporting it. That's my prediction. I could be wrong. I could very well be wrong. Maybe Roberts wants to be on the side of the winning team on this. I don't know. Who knows? My educated guess on this is that he will be on the minority in this one, and that the majority will be Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Alito, and of course Thomas, and so that is the conversation as we've gone through the law. I will, we've almost done a 3-hour show. Let's see. Brandy Rose, how would I send a link? I don't think you're allowed to send links, Brandy, if you're not like a moderator in the if you're not one of my moderators, which I don't have any moderators at this point. If you're not listed as a moderator, like if you don't have the little gear or whatever tool that's listed by the people that you'll see like in house chat, those people I think can share links. Hal could share links. I don't think that y'all can. Which, if you want to, you can email me. If you want to email the link, liberaldanradio@gmail.com, and I'll try to remember to post it on, if it's relevant or whatever, to the topic on Wednesday's show. We'll probably be going back over this and some other issues on Wednesday's show, Wednesday 8 p.m. Central, both here on YouTube and blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan. Let's see. What are some of the things that I missed? Hide in Shadows, 1/3 of all little girls are molested, just the molestations, rapes that are reported, not after anyone's hard, blah, blah. Hide in Shadows, 1/3 and 1/4 of the low end. Maybe we only hear about 3% of the cases in total population, maybe 10 to 12%, which is high, but we still never hear about it. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see. See what else is in there. Nothing too much else on the abortion issue. But anyway, so there we have it. There is the conversation, my rant about this new ruling, this draft of a ruling. Hopefully, the ruling will not... probably won't take part until June or whatever. And then hopefully we can get the legislator to do something, or hopefully the people can come out and make this a temporary thing by giving Biden a bigger majority in both the House and the Senate, in order to make sure that we can pass legislation and not have to rely on, getting every single cat herded on every single issue in order to get what we need done. Let's see. These studies suggest the child sexual abuse prevalence rate for girls is 10.7 to 17.4. Rate for boys is 3.8 to 4.6. 6 studies suggest an overall full childhood sexual abuse. And as I've discussed previously, and just a side note on that, many times when people, I have my 3-hour episode of living life as a fat man in this country, and one of the things I cover is something I learned when I worked at one of the local Department of Health's or Institute of Public Health, I should say. It wasn't the Department of Health, but it's the Institute of Public Health locally here. One of the things that was covered in one of the, and I went on and researched it more, was that people who are abused as children are more likely to be obese or morbidly obese when they grow up. It's not to say that all people who are obese or morbidly obese are so because they were abused as kids, and it doesn't mean that all people that were abused as kids are going to be morbidly obese. It's just there's a potential correlation there, a strong correlation there, if not a causation, between a history of childhood abuse and especially sexual abuse with obesity as an adult. And in many of the cases, especially when in cases of young girls, a lot of the reason that they will like some of the people will just use food as a coping mechanism to try and get themselves, like to deal with whatever stress they deal with. Because when you're a young kid, you don't have access to things like drugs or alcohol. So, or most people don't, some do. But mostly, if you're a kid and you're getting abused and you need something to cope with, you're not going to cope with pot or Coke or sugar or sweets or whatever. You're going to cope, or you're not going to, let me just start over. When you're a young kid, you're not going to cope with drugs or alcohol. You're going to cope with sugar and sweets because that's what you're going to have available to you. So that's going to be the lessons that you learn, is that as a kid, you deal with your pain by giving yourself something that's going to cause you pleasure to kind of drown that out, to kind of deal with the pain that you're dealing with. So if you're learning from a young age to deal with your problems with sugary foods, with sweets and candies and snacks and just food in general, you're going to end up having an unhealthy relationship with food, which is going to cause you to be more obese when you get older in many of these cases. An additional thing to consider, though, is one of the studies that I was looking at when I was discussing this on my podcast was that young women it won't just be a subconscious thing of, the sugar and the candy and the snacks taste good. It's helping me to deal with these, I'm coping. It's not just the subconscious coping mechanism that they're using with the food. It's also the fact that they will make the conscious decision that if I make myself bigger, if I make myself to be overweight, then maybe I'll be seen as less attractive to my abuser and therefore be less likely to be abused. Now, in some cases that might work, I don't know. In other cases it probably wouldn't work, because in many of the cases it's not about attraction, it's about power and control. I would say that maybe some of them might be less likely to do it, might seek another one who they find, quote, more attractive, as disgusting as that sounds. But I think that, it's just something additional. Sometimes it's a conscious decision to try and self-sabotage how they look in order to make themselves a less appealing target. Which is sad. It's very sad. It's a very sad thing to think about. It was a difficult show, but I felt like it had to be done because I've been dealing with my weight for a while now, and I want to just to come clean and just go and talk about all the things that I've thought about or I've dealt with in my lifetime for being, quote, fat. And I just said it today. Like, I remember when I was in high school, I was 5'11", 6 foot tall, 195 pounds. I thought I was fat then. I would love to be as fat as I thought I was back then. I thought I was fat then, but I would love to be back to that weight. That'd be lovely. That'd be wonderful. It'd be amazing. It's not going to happen because I can't just snap a finger and have it happen. But we have a very unhealthy, feeling in society about what bodies should look like and what bodies are healthy and what bodies are not healthy. And you have repeating cycles that repeat themselves over and over again. Anyway, so I'm not going to talk too much about the whole living life as an overweight person. There is a show about that. It's here on YouTube. just check out one of my previous podcasts. I think it's Life as an Obese Man or Life as a Fat Man in America or whatever. If you're interested in hearing about that, give that a listen as well. It's one of the things I guess I would probably put, if I had to make a must-watch list of episodes to watch, I'd probably put this one on it. I'd probably put that one on it. I'd probably put all my ones with Hal on it. And then I'd probably find some other ones that were just generally really good. I have a couple of episodes where I did shows with Evie Winters, who is an advocate on trans issues. Those are excellent shows as well. Thank you, Wes. Wes loves me for how I am. That's nice. It's nice to hear. Let's see. Brandy says, I agree that prostitution should be legal and regulated. I just think it should be legal. Allow people to have consensual relationships with others. I don't know if you want to regulate it to, if you're going to allow that to be on the tax forms, then how are you going to prove, if you get paid in cash, it might be hard to prove how much cash you really earn, how much income you really earned. But other than that, I don't necessarily think, is there a reason to require people who choose to be prostitutes to go through mandatory STI screenings? Maybe that's a reasonable thing to do, and that could be something that's discussed. But I think that is also something that could potentially be self-regulating. Like, for example, if somebody wants to obtain a prostitute, obtain the services of not obtain a prostitute, but obtain the services of a prostitute, maybe they should, if they want to, make sure that they have their tests are all up to date. Maybe that's one thing that would set someone else and make someone more attractive as a potential, both as a client and as somebody who the client seeks to obtain services from. Maybe that would make them more attractive. Maybe that would be something that people could do to make them be more attractive in the whole scheme of things. Or maybe government does have a role in making sure that certain people take certain tests. Like, I guess if you're going to maintain your law license, you have to maintain with the CLE, continuing learning exams. You have, I don't know if that's the exact acronym, but lawyers continue to have to take tests, continue to have to, keep taking courses and remain fresh. Other occupations also for licensure require certain tests to be taken to be to make sure that they're keeping up with all of the standards. So maybe it's reasonable to then maybe have, if somebody is going to choose to be a sex worker, to enable them to have maybe a place where they could safely get tested and then have those tests be reliably shown on a database. There are people who probably wouldn't take part in it or whatever, and who might do it under the table and not worry about getting the tests. And maybe the people who do take the tests are going to make this more expensive. I don't know. It's whether or not it's enforceable or not would be, really depend on a lot of things. But it's not necessarily in the purview of what's going on. Purview of a discussion. And Brandy says, everybody hates abortions. Unfortunately, they can be very necessary. They are very necessary. And I don't know if I hate abortions. I would say that maybe, everybody might agree that the ideal number of abortions would be zero. Not should be zero, but would be zero, in that if you made it so that the only people that got pregnant are people who wanted to be pregnant, and that no medical condition, and you had the healthcare so well done that every pregnancy was a healthy one, and that everybody would be able to have a safe and healthy pregnancy with no issues that occurred, then yeah, you would at that point probably have zero abortions, because then every pregnancy would be wanted and every pregnancy would be healthy, at which point you would get to zero. But you know how you don't get there, right? You don't get there by enacting conservative policies. You only get there by enacting liberal policies. Again, thank you, Brandy. Again, you as well. Thank you so much for listening. Everybody, Wes, Hide in the Shadows, for sticking with me the entire time. We have other listeners that I think are just lurking. Shouts out to y'all as well. If you haven't liked the video, please remember to like it. This will be available to watch later. So if you, I know I started a little late, so if you want, if you think that people need to see this video, Share it to your timelines. Make sure that everybody knows. And if you don't think they could stand this long 3-hour video, then by all means, send in my shorter one as well. I may make some other ones as well, just kind of briefly go over the things like my issue with talking about what jolly old England has to say. The Parliament, they said that, in 1700s that abortion shouldn't be legal. And then, why do we care? We fought a war. We fought our independence. We no longer have to deal with the people across the pond and their silly little laws. Shouldn't affect us. Again, one of my many problems with this ruling. But I probably will make some more videos at some point between now and then, and Wednesday. I will be on the air this Wednesday instead of Thursday. Wednesday is the normal date. There was some discussion about with some of the sparklers that maybe they might be more likely to listen or watch if I was on a Thursday. Even if I was going to try and do that, maybe I would probably not. I would not be able to do it this Thursday because I'm taking my kids to the Doctor Strange movie. So this Thursday would be not possible. Maybe I'll toy around with doing 2 days a week if I get enough people watching. So we'll see. And then I'll do an experiment. Is Wednesday good? Is Thursday good? And we'll do that experiment. We'll see how many more viewers we get on those days. Anyway, again, thank y'all very much for watching. I appreciate it. Tell your friends, like, subscribe. I'll probably be in at least one of Hal's shows tomorrow, watching, giving comments. Again, if you see people who you think would benefit from this video, just let them know, and let them know to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I know it's hard to say this because this ruling really sucks, but I do hope y'all have a good rest of your night as much as you can after thinking about how horrible these countries' laws are. But again, thank you very much for watching, and have a good night. Bye.